Normally, it's only the first sentence is scripted, and the rest of it's just. That's what I'm just thinking about. Okay, I got a good one. All right, I think everything's recording.
Okay.
So, ready?
Go.
Welcome to the Walk On Way. Today we have Thomas Paron, a father of three, a husband, a Michigan native turned Vermonter, the most reliable person I know, and also my father. So thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited to get chatting. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about the setting of where we are right now?
Well, we are in Montreal, Canada. We're on a 2002 Nordhaven 35 Coastal Pilot. There are 25 of these boats made, and I'm on a 6-week trip. This is the end of week 1. From here we go to Ottawa, Kingston, Ontario, up to Thousand Islands. Mom will join us in Ottawa. It's life on the water's a great thing.
And this is the second, I know we talked about this yesterday, but this is the second or third long boat trip on this boat.
On this boat, this is the second long trip.
Okay. And did you say the name of the boat?
The name of the boat's Owl.
Okay. From Shelburne.
From Shelburne, Vermont, and this is again hull number 16 of 25.
That's awesome. Today, I guess we'll talk a little bit about boating, but I kind of do have a little bit of an agenda, which I shared with you beforehand. Chat about childhood, parenting, career, leadership, beliefs, drive, maybe touch a little bit on politics, and finish up with life sentiment. It may not go that way at all,
Okay.
but that's kind of what I have planned. So, I guess we'll start with childhood. I mentioned in your intro, Michigan native.
Yep.
So you grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. Can you tell me a little bit about Saginaw and everyone else about Saginaw and what life was like and is like now there?
Sure. So I was born in actually Royal Oak, Michigan, and my dad worked for General Motors, and he took a transfer to Saginaw when I was probably a year old. So we lived in this little neighborhood in a 1,200 square foot raised ranch, and behind the house was basically cornfields. It was a dead-end road. And it was a GM town. There were probably, I'm going to say, 6 GM plants. He worked at Central Foundry. And it was classic middle America. I could walk to my elementary school through a cornfield. I could walk to my middle school, and I could walk to my high school.
And how things changed since in the time?
Well, there are one plant is left, and it's owned, I believe, by the Chinese.
Okay.
So with globalization, all these plants basically shut down. My dad retired when he was 55 in '86, and they closed. Right now, the factory he worked in is basically a vacant field. So in the old days, you could get out of high school, go work at GM, and retire at 55 with a pension. So what's changed in that town essentially is there are no union jobs where people can work out of high school and provide a nice living, middle class living, and then retire. So they're really, people have to work essentially either fast food or the service industry like a Walmart, or they move.
And that's interesting because we were talking about this yesterday and the day before about how GM started to struggle with the onset of unions, and that kind of influenced the politics of that region, right?
Yeah, so the unions, it was really a conjunction of unions and globalization. So you had the foreign car manufacturers coming into the States. They provided a better product, and GM and Ford and Chrysler were basically caught flat-footed. They had mediocre products. Actually, one of the first, my mom's brand was always a Monte Carlo, GM Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
My dad could actually buy cars at a discount, GM cars, and we bought a GM Vega, which is a 1974 Vega, brand new car, had a aluminum block engine, and the tow truck came with about 1,100 miles on the car because it basically no longer ran. This is a brand new car, 1,100 miles. So that was really kind of the epitome of GM and their mediocre product. And the Japanese came in and basically, you know, they cleaned them up.
Yeah, right.
And then the unions were just really kind of on top of that, where they were negotiating for higher wages, shorter work weeks, you know, better concessions from healthcare, and it made GM, in conjunction with globalization and really poor management decisions, a less competitive company. And it ultimately, through the financial crisis, it drove them into bankruptcy. So Chrysler was in bankruptcy, GM declared bankruptcy, Ford's the only company that did not declare bankruptcy. And a lot of the Ford shareholders are actually Ford, you know, family members. So all the auto companies took money from the federal government after the financial collapse, but actually GM and Chrysler declared bankruptcy.
Okay. I'd like to go back to that a little bit later when we discuss kind of another thing I wanted to talk about was generations.
Sure.
And how major events, again, this is things that we've been talking about a lot recently, how major events that happen in the formative years of people from certain generations, how that impacts their politics, their beliefs, and basically just those two I'm focused on, is their politics and their just general life beliefs, how they're influenced by those events in their formative years, and what trends you see across generations. And I'd like to focus kind of on you, my generation, your parents' generation, and how some of those events, like GM struggling with globalization compounded with unions as an example, how that impacted their life philosophy and their politics, etc. But before that, I want to stick to Saginaw and your childhood. I kind of a broad question. So what were the dominant feelings that come to mind when you think of your life? Let's say 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. You can pick one or pick different categories. I just want to see what the dominant feelings that you remember were from different stages of childhood.
I don't remember a lot of the early childhood other than I had a lot of freedom, you know, because we lived in this dead-end road and there was cornfields in the back, and I basically, you know, mom stayed home, dad worked. He was always home at like 5:15, so you had to be home for dinner. But I basically got on my Huffy bike and I roamed the neighborhood.
What's a Huffy bike?
A Huffy bike Huffy was the brand. It was just a cheap Kmart, you know, bike.
It's not like a pocket rocket.
No. So, and I just pedaled around. And, you know, I built a fort in the backyard. You know, this, again, 1,200 square foot ranch, you know, small lot, but I had a ton of freedom. And I wasn't watching TV. I was never at home. I got up and I left. And I came back for dinner. Maybe for lunch to make a bologna sandwich, but that was basically it. So I remember that up until probably high school. And, you know, before high school, summer, you were filled with playing Little League.
Right.
And depending where the game was in the field, either I could ride my bike there or my mom would drop me off. We had one buddy that, in that town, what was interesting is that all these families, most of them worked at GM. I was the youngest of three, so my one buddy had a batting cage.
Nice. In his backyard?
In his backyard. You know, with basically the screen, and it was the old arm that, you know, you'd see it and then it would release and throw, and you could adjust it for, you know, a curve.
It's like a catapult?
It's like a catapult, just the way it instead of the two wheels.
But you pulled it?
No, it was all electronic. You plugged it in, but it was basically, it came in the feeder and it threw. And I think after that they did have the spinning, you know, tires. But I'd ride over there and we would basically, you know, do batting practice. and then we'd bike over to 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee, and then I'd bike home. So that was up until high school. High school, there was an overlap with Little League and high school baseball. But at that point, I had a driver's license, soon thereafter. I was playing sports in high school, and I remember that part of Saginaw much more than the early part. The early part was really, we'd go on these great vacations on a boat. My dad had I think in 1973 they bought a boat, and he would go on these 6-week vacations. We'd go up to Canada. And as the youngest, I always had to be dragged along, but it was fantastic. It was basically 3 kids, mom, dad, and a dog, in a 28-foot sailboat without air conditioning, without a refrigerator, but in northern Canada, no cell phone.
This is Terrier, Jack Russell?
This was Coco. So Coco was kind of a mix, a little bit of Jack in her, yeah, a little bit of Dachshund.
Yeah. What color?
So it was like a Dachshund color.
Like brown.
Brown, a little nasty, short temper.
Oh.
Hated being on the boat, didn't like to swim.
Wait, she had the Dachshund body?
Yeah, but taller legs, terrier legs.
But long torso.
Yeah, it was Coco number 1. Coco number 2 got hit by a car.
I remember you
Yeah.
telling that story.
And that was a beagle. So
Both the long torso dogs.
they're probably, that.
Beagles are pretty long.
Yeah, but it wasn't like, our current dogs, a little shorter than that.
Okay, so getting a little sense for the activities and the content of your days, but we don't have to harp on it too much, but were there general feelings or sentiments that come to mind when you think of those certain times? So you said you remember a lot from that middle school, high school, like the Little League, high school sports time. Are there like general sentiment, when you think age 10 to 13, is there like a general feeling that you remember feeling a lot, general sentiment? You talked about having a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
Do you have any emotions that you associate with each certain sections?
Well, the freedom was really a byproduct of, growing up in an ethnic family.
Yeah.
Where, both my parents were Greek, the youngest of 3 children, and anyone in the audience that knows a little bit about, Greeks, a little bit temper, a little bit of yelling sometimes. And the freedom to me was just an escape.
Right.
To get on the bike and go. And then when my group of friends had the ability to drive, we would go fishing, we would go, my one neighbor lived kitty corner, Ray, who I'm still friends with today. We would ride over and we would have these colossal tennis matches. Neither of us were actually tennis.
Where?
To the high school.
Okay.
High school had courts. So, but it was, what do we do in the summer? And, I had all these chores like mow the lawns, sweep the garage, and, my dad had basically chores set up for me. And we would have this competition about our lawns where we try and put fertilizer down and who could get the best lawn in the neighborhood. And then we'd go, hop on our bike and basically we'd play like 3 hours of tennis.
That's awesome.
And, it was always coming down to the wire, or we would play fast pitch with a tennis ball. So either against his garage or my garage.
Just 1-on-1?
1-on-1. So, you have to bat left-handed and right-handed, and then if you hit a line drive over the street, as a single, into the neighbor's trees was a double, off the roof was a triple, and over the house was a home run.
What about a smashed window?
Well, it was a tennis ball.
Yeah,
so
but
we never had that. And the funny thing is that when it went over the house, you had to hop the fence because they had a dog back there. So we always had to supply tennis balls. But that I think that was just a really innocent way to grow up. And we were all at that point, 9th grade on, we were drinking. And my dad always said, hey, if you're gonna drink beer, I want you to do it in my basement.
Yeah.
So you could basically, Ray would walk over and a couple other guys would walk into the neighborhood, and you had to come and sit on the couch with my dad because all the dads knew each other from work. What are you doing? How's
from
mom?
GM?
Yes.
Really?
I would say 80% of the people knew each other. John Newcomb came over, and his dad was like my dad's boss's boss.
What percent of the town did they employ?
It's a big percentage of my group. We lived, Saginaw was the Saginaw City.
Were you like near the facility?
No, not necessarily. Well, probably 6 or 7 miles. But we lived in Saginaw Township, was a upper middle class area, and then there was the city, which was a medium to lower middle class, maybe even lower class. So most of our parents worked in manufacturing.
Can you what's, maybe it's the same now, but what was the difference then between upper middle and lower middle?
Well, we bought that house in 1964. My parents bought it. It was an $18,000 house. And I think when my dad retired, he was probably making, 45 to 50,000 a year. So, but mom never worked. He retired at 55, which nobody does today. He had no mortgage, educated 3 kids, married my sister, all out of current income, and he saved money. So on 50,000 a year, you could really be middle class. We'd go on vacation.
I thought Grandma did some real estate stuff.
She did real estate, but that was a really supplementary income. And she basically just squirreled that away, and but my dad basically handed his paycheck over to my mom, and she was the CFO of the house.
Mm-hmm.
He never got involved in finances.
Was that common?
I don't know if it was common or not. It was something that you never had that conversation with your buddies to say, hey, who pays the bills in your house? It just never. Ray, his father was killed when Ray was a young child,
Mm-hmm.
so there was never a father there. But we never had that conversation. It was always this high degree of respect. You walked in the house, you shook the father's hand. Mr. Pavich, how are you? Mr. Zadella, how are you? Mr. Liebinger, how are you? And the mom was there, always, like a little hug, but you never had the conversation when you were on the banks of the river fishing, saying, "Hey, who pays the bills in your house?"
Okay. So you mentioned maybe a couple minutes ago, at the beginning of that description, a little bit about your family's heritage, or our family's heritage. How did our Greek heritage impact your growing up, your childhood? You mentioned things could be loud, things like
Right.
that.
In Saginaw, there was a Greek church in a Greek community, and I would say it was a very, very supportive.
This is Greek Orthodox.
Greek Orthodox, very, very supportive, tight-knit group where Easter would come and they would have a lamb roast, and you'd go over to so-and-so's house and they would come over to our house. And I think that was much more prevalent when I was younger. I don't remember it, but just through photos of Papu and Grandma that you'd see, they were probably in the 30s and 40s, and there was a lot of social activity, going on. Again, being the youngest of 3, we did go to church. I was an altar boy, and my oldest brother's a little over 7 years older. So, he was in college, and I was basically alone for that good chunk. From basically middle school on, I was in the house by myself. And once once there was some social activity, i.e. maybe, drinking,
Mm-hmm.
My mom just kind of gave up and said, you don't have to go to church, because I'd sleep in, because in that environment you had to wear a suit.
And did all your buddies go?
No, because none of my buddies were Greek.
Okay. But they didn't go to...
Yeah, they
church?
might have gone to a Catholic church or a Protestant church. I don't know. But the one thing with the Greek Orthodox Church is the Divine Liturgy, was 2 hours on a Sunday. Because, and by the time I got home, Ray was next door playing basketball, and it was like, I'm in this polyester suit, and everyone, you had to get in the Cadillac, and, it was just like, what am I doing? And the Divine Liturgy was in Greek. So if you didn't really...
So you didn't understand it.
So most of from a generational point of view, the early generation, the kids learned Greek first before they went to school. So we never spoke Greek in the house.
Okay. Got it. And then I want to hear a little bit, changing gears a little bit, I want to hear about high school, just briefly about your education experience, and then also the high school sports experience.
Okay. So went to public schools, basically, and high school rolled around, and I wasn't a good student. I probably had 3 or 4 learning disabilities. And when high school rolled around, my dad said, listen, you get a 3.0, which is basically a B, and you write your ticket, no trouble. I'm like, all right, great, So that was the only thing he said. And write your ticket meant that he wasn't going to be hounding you. I'm playing high school football, freshman football, having a great time. I'm starting, great group of friends. High school was a pretty fun environment. And midterms came, or I guess through the September, so football's fall sport. So he was like, how's your, how the grades? Everything's good, yeah, no trouble. And the first marking period came, and I think it was like a 1.8. Okay, so which is really, obviously
undershot it a little bit.
Undershot just a little bit, and he said, all right, your ass is mine. He said, if you can't manage your own time, I'm going to do it for you. So instead of really kind of, and they did the best they could as parents, but instead of really looking at what was the core root of the problem, they thought it was time management, and so he was going to put a square peg in a round hole. So every day I had to do my homework. He would be in the kitchen, and I had to show him my homework. And he would say, this stinks, go do it again. So I was very resentful sitting in my room trying to do homework where it just didn't come easy, and I didn't really like school. And the fact that he was riding me was a real issue, and it kind of accelerated to the point where so my brother was almost kind of his, not co-parenting, but he was a resource for my dad. So my brother at that point, I think, was maybe in dental school. So he would come home, and my dad would say, hey, I'm going to take sports away from your brother.
And the age gap is 7?
7.
7 years.
Yeah. So.
And between you and Connie, middle
4.
child? 4 years.
Yeah. So 5, could even be 5. I think there's 2 between the two, so I think it's 5. So he was going to take high school sports away. My brother said, don't do that, because he's either with the athletes or with the druggies. And who would you rather have him with? And he said, all right, so he allowed me to play sports. But what happened is Friday was my night, Saturday was my night, Sunday through Thursday, he owned my schedule.
Yeah.
So I couldn't go out, couldn't go to basketball games, couldn't do anything. So
like watch basketball games?
No, when winter came, there was a high school basketball game. So I was wrestling.
Yeah.
It was my winter sport. And my other buddies were
So you were allowed to go to your matches, your wrestling,
yes,
but
I couldn't go.
watch.
I couldn't go watch a buddy's game. Like Wednesday, there would be a Wednesday game, and he's like, "No, you can't. You got to study." So my grades basically were pretty mediocre until my junior year. And
when did he start really?
Freshman year. But nothing really improved.
Okay.
He would even pick my schedule. You're going to take this class, this class, this class.
Yeah.
And finally, my junior year, he basically, it was I think it was a recession. So my brother would come home from dental school, work at GM, and he could make $10,000 over the summer, and it could help pay for dental school. So he couldn't get a job at the foundry.
What did he do at GM?
He worked in the foundry, basically like blue collar, wasn't a white collar job.
Okay.
So he worked like third shift.
Wow.
But my dad could give him an intro, and that's how he got the job there. So he'd make $10,000 working in the foundry, pouring iron or something like that.
Jeez.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Rudy,
Yeah.
So, and then he'd come home and they'd have breakfast together, and then my brother would go to bed. And my dad would take off because he worked, normal shift. But Nick couldn't get a job that summer, and I was hanging around basically doing. I think I was working at Barnes Family Restaurant, some menial job, and my dad said, "Hey, you're going to go to Europe, backpacking with your brother." And I was like, "Why would I want to do that? All my buddies are here.
Yeah.
I'm having a good time here." He says, "Nope, you're going to sell your car," which I sold for it was a Ford 71 pickup that I bought for $375. I think I sold it for $425, and I had to give him that money, and then
$375.
Yeah,
dollars.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So then he had 2 backpacks. I remember he was smoking Pall Malls, sewing the American flag on. There was an orange backpack and a green backpack. So we packed everything up. I had a Eurail pass, youth hostel, and like $200 in cash and my passport, and we took off. And that was kind of a game changer for me, where I kind of said, I should really try and apply myself a little more, and getting better grades, getting an education is my ticket away. And at that point, I just wanted to run from that area. I wanted to run from the town. I wanted to run from that area and be independent.
This is after you had your Europe experience?
This is my junior year, so when I came back, so it was all part of...
Based on what you'd seen over there, you're like, oh, there's more?
It was just, I was there, I was alone. So half the time, I would travel with my brother, and then he would go off on some tangent and say, well, I'm hanging out with this other, non-male, friend I just made, and I'll meet you, in Barcelona in a week. So, all right, So, and a lot of times I was by myself.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but, I was probably 20 to 30% of the time I was by myself. And it was just a lot of time to be thoughtful and I guess reflective. I'm 17 at that point. And I'm like, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to be under my dad's, thumbnail? School, I'm not going to be a doctor, And what was interesting is that I was always the organizer within my friends. I could always fix things. I was the organizer. I was the doer. But I was never well read. I couldn't, I lost concentration all the time. So I was probably dyslexic. But it was just sitting in a textbook environment was difficult. So I came back, applied myself, and I got better grades. But my overall grade point was like 2.2.
Okay.
Which is a disaster.
Well, because of the first 3 years,
yes.
like weighing it.
Yes. So I was on a roll my senior year, but all the damage had been done. So now I'm applying to schools, and my brother went to Alma. A lot of the Greek people went to Alma, and the acceptance rate was like 70%.
Which is a small school.
Small
in Michigan.
liberal arts school in Michigan, where a lot of Greeks went. Acceptance rate was 70%, and I didn't get in. So there was a Merchant Marine Academy in Traverse City, Michigan, where again my dad, he was a little bit of a genius in many ways, and again he did the best way. But he says, all right, you're mechanically inclined, you like the water, you can go to the Merchant Marine Academy. It's tied to a community college, and when you're done, you get your Merchant Marine license, and it's 100% job placement. And you can make, $70,000 a year. So I went there, and I flourished, and they had a off-campus program through Ferris State where you can get your 4-year degree. At that point, the Merchant Marine Academy was not offering a 4-year degree.
Okay.
They have subsequently changed that, and I do have a 4-year degree from the Merchant Marine Academy as well as from Ferris. But it was perfect. It was a small environment. I would have been lost in a big school.
How many students?
There were 95 in my class. Really small.
Yeah.
What was interesting, community college.
And what was the town?
Traverse City.
Okay. I didn't know it was in Traverse City.
Yeah.
So all in Lake Michigan.
Yep, all in Lake Michigan. So it's a community college called Northwestern Michigan College. I was an RA there in the dorm. I became student government president, which was kind of interesting. I got to do the commencement speech.
Wait, I'm a little bit confused on. You did 2 years at the community college.
It was a 3-year. The Merchant Marine Academy was a 3-year program,
right?
Tied through.
Oh, okay. It was. Okay.
And then Ferris State brought professors to the community college, and it was a night program.
Oh, okay. So everything was at that campus.
Yeah, I've never been to Ferris State.
Okay.
And I have a 4-year degree from Ferris State.
Wow.
So it was an off-campus program. So anyway, during when I graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy, I stayed 1 more year to do Ferris State. I got a job at E.F. Hutton. I worked for a broker, and I was going to school at night. And then I graduated that summer, and packed up. I had a 1979 Saab Turbo Wagon 900, and I backed it up, and I took off to Boston. Actually, I had a broomstick on the back with all my suits and clothes on a hanger. I had Johnson Murphy polished shoes because I had to dress up. I had cufflinks, the whole 9 yards. I was going to go be a business person.
So,
Oh,
someone's parking.
Yeah.
Do you need to?
No, they should be. I think they're okay.
Yeah. So wait, you left. When did you leave home?
I was 18.
You were 18.
The summer of that when I graduated in June, and I think I left June 21st for college, not September.
When did it start?
June 21st.
College started that early? Okay. And there was 3 years.
3 years full time, no summers.
Okay. Okay, so it's really
Because
so
you
it's
had-
4 years just condensed.
Well, you had to work. There was a co-op. It was a little bit like Northeastern, if you will, where you had to work 9 months. So you went out to sea on a ship. I worked for Ford and U.S. Steel on merchant ships, and that was 9 months. You went out 3 months one time and 6 months the other.
Okay. And then you finished when you were 21.
Yep.
And you went to Boston because you had a job there?
No, I wanted to just leave the area.
So you just moved to Boston.
I had a high school buddy that lived in Milford, Mass, which is outside of Boston, and I went there and stayed in his house, and I sent resumes out. And so my first job was a company in Canton, Mass, which is a suburb of Boston, and it was a market research analyst. So my attitude at that point is I can do anything. I don't care. I would have sent an ad out for chief financial officer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like, I'll talk my way through it and I'll learn.
Mm-hmm.
I had just supreme confidence that I could do anything. So I never studied marketing. I didn't know what a market analyst did.
Yeah.
But that was
What do they do?
We did a competitive analysis of that industry. It was a trade show, display booth manufacturer.
Oh, wow.
So
It's specific.
yeah, so we looked at all the competition and how would they price their product, what it was made, what niche it was in, and I was in the marketing department. But what was interesting is that the head of marketing and sales was a Dartmouth guy. So all these people that worked at Outline were filled with graduates at Dartmouth College, and this guy happened to be Greek.
Okay.
His name was Alex Dimiturko. So he hired all these Dartmouth people, including your mother, and one Greek from a community college, and it was
That's
me.
awesome. And you
So-
sent your resume in via...
hard copy. You had a cover letter, you put a postage stamp
you
on
mailed
it.
it, you didn't...
Mailed it in, and then I had a system. I followed up. I'm calling, about the job. I put a resume in, and then they set up an interview, and I drove in, and it was like probably a 45-minute drive from there, and I didn't know where I was going. There was no GPS at that
Mhm.
point.
Oh, yeah.
And I found it, and I think I had 2 interviews, maybe even 1.
When you don't have this is a weird question, but when you don't have GPS, I'm thinking like if I were leaving for that interview and I didn't have GPS, which I rely on heavily, how early did you leave?
That's a good. I don't remember, but
Do you think you would have given yourself like an hour buffer at least?
Yeah, I wasn't late. There's no way I was going to be late.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
because you could get really lost.
Yes.
And just a map.
Just a map. I think I had a map. I knew I was going to go I-90, and I was going to get on
picture that.
basically 128, and I knew it was going to be exit ABC.
I can kind of remember some trips we did when I was really little, when we would have a map.
Yeah.
Like I remember there's a map in the back seat.
You could go to AAA and get what they call a trip ticket, where when we would go down to Florida when I was a kid, from Michigan, there was a map and you flipped it over and it was highlighted all the way down, so you knew. And then you went, you turned the page. Oh, we're in Tennessee now.
Yeah.
You turned the page. We're getting close to Kentucky.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was not a traditional high school. It wasn't. It was a very traditional high school experience. Other than, a lot of my buddies were, honor society, top 20 students. I had all these choices, and my path was pretty narrow. But I'm friends with these guys today, and what's interesting about that town, and I say this often, is first of all the period of growing up. First of all, there's a lot of luck that goes into life, but that period growing up is we didn't have any wars. There were no major recessions that we were dealing with. You could go to college as a very mediocre student, and it was essentially free. It was $19 a credit. So if you do the math on that, it's like $500 a semester.
That's how much like a credit costs now, at least.
Yes, exactly.
That's
it's probably $1,000.
500, like UVM, 500 is probably like an in-state credit.
So it's 19. So that the school, my 4-year degree probably cost around. I bet it was under $5,000. But it was like $3,500.
Yeah.
So.
And you had 2 4-year degrees.
Yeah, but it was all yes. Yeah. 2 pieces of paper.
And they were the same thing.
One was in maritime engineering, and the other was in business, accounting and finance. So, not marketing. That was my first job, was marketing. So, but I'm like, I can do the job. Walk in, firm handshake. I invested in a really good suit, really good shoes.
Well, do you remember the brand?
It was Hart Schaffner. It was a Hart Schaffner suit with Johnson Murphy boardroom shoes, and I could tie a Windsor knot, and I always had dry cleaning.
Is that the one that's even?
Just, it was a small knot, but even. But I looked like an investment banker, and I was comfortable to talk to people, and I was a grinder. One thing with that generation is that we were all generation. Yes, we were all grinders. Whatever it took, you were just gonna grind it out. So we talked the other day about working smart versus working hard. We were all just grinders. You're going to work hard, you're going to pay your dues, and good things are going to happen.
I'd like to go back to that a little bit later and talk about why that was the case and what, maybe do some theorizing into what maybe happened in your guys' formative years that caused that to be a trend. I don't want to, let's not get into it right now, but that's something I do want to talk about. Sticking with childhood / formative years a little bit, how did the following play a role in your life and early development? So we have sailing, sports, and education. We already talked a little bit about sports and education, so we don't have to harp on those too much, but sailing, I'm curious about. Talked about going on 6-week boat trips with your parents and 2 siblings and Coco 1/2. But
so my dad always had, boats, and he started with power boats, but they were small boats. So he was the consummate, bargain hunter. So he would buy something for $50 and fix it up. So I think one boat was the Constant Michelle, which is Connie is my sister's name. And we would go out in Saginaw Bay and tool around, but really nothing substantial. And I think some of his GM guys were, boaters. And my dad, was in the Navy. He was, probably half gypsy, so he always wanted to travel. And I came down with salmonella typhus as a kid. I was probably 11, maybe 9. And I was in the hospital for like 3 weeks. And they didn't know what it was. And I had to have ice baths. I was, if they were afraid they were going to lose me.
What is that?
It's like a blood disorder.
Salmonella
typhus.
Is it from like
something
raw food? Like
something like that. So what happened is that
it's a category of salmonella. What is it?
I don't know exactly what it is, but I had to have a bone marrow. They had all these tests. I'm in the hospital for 3 weeks.
Bone marrow test?
Yeah.
How do they do that?
They put you on your side. They put a big needle in your hip and pull out. So. And I was having these ice baths to keep my temperature down. And there was some young intern was doing his rounds saying, "Hey, have you thought about this?" And he's the one that got it. And it could have been some old feta cheese that Grandma had in the fridge.
What would you have to take?
I don't know exactly what happened, but I was cured and I was out of the hospital. But I remember when I was there, my dad said, "If you live, what kind of boat do you? We're going to get a boat. What kind of boat do you want? A sailboat or a powerboat?" I said a sailboat.
Was he serious?
Serious.
Like about the if you
73. He went out and bought a Tanzer 28.
No, but if was he serious about like, or was he joking with you about the
Well,
if
he
you
was.
live?
I was 9 years old, so I don't know if he was joking or
Okay.
not. What I do know is that we bought a 1973 when I got out of the hospital, brand new Tanzer, right from the factory. It wasn't a used, brand new,
Okay.
and it was named Family Affair. Which is funny.
Um,
So that was my sailing. We were members of the Saginaw Bay Yacht Club, which was in the adjoining town, and we'd go there every weekend. And it was just, there were a bunch of kids. It was another environment where there were a bunch of kids, and we would have sailboat races with prams, Optimus prams. There was a little kitchen there where I remember the guy made homemade donuts, and I'd go there in the morning, and all the parents were drinking coffee, and we'd go into the TV room and snag a couple homemade donuts, and then we'd go sailing, and then we'd go home on Sunday, and then Dad would work, and then Friday he'd come home from work, we'd hop in the car, and we'd go to the boat.
That's pretty cool.
Until sports came, then I had to go. We had like football would start, and that was mid-August. You do 2-a-days, and before school.
And that was that even for like the freshman team?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. In the giant field, freshman, JV, varsity all practiced. There were different segments of the field.
Okay.
So
sailing, that was your first introduction to sailing was 9 years old?
Yes.
Okay. Your dad wasn't a sailor before that?
No, I think he might have gone out with friends, but he never had.
And did you express interest in wanting a boat?
Yeah, I think it was just
it's just like a cool thing.
Who doesn't want to be in the water?
Right. So we have, that's an interesting introduction to sailing in the hospital. But how did those trips and just being on the water, being on the boat kind of shape you, or how do you think it did, if at all?
I don't think
besides just developing a passion for it.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily shaped me. It was just another avenue of freedom where, we'd get up early, we'd motor or we'd sail to the next port, and then I would take off. We'd have dinner, and we'd have dinner as a family on the boat. I have no idea what we talked about, but it was all this joint responsibility where I had to clean the dishes. Mom was cooking hamburger helper, over the alcohol stove. We sat basically at a table like this with the dog underneath looking for, some scraps exactly. And then we had to do the dishes, and we took off. And remember, summers in Michigan, it doesn't get dark until 9:30, 10. So when I got dark, I came back, went to bed, and, rinse and repeat.
Right. That's pretty cool. So that's sailing.
Yeah.
Then we have sports and education. Again, we already touched on these a little bit, so we don't have to talk too long. But how do you see them as playing a role in your life, specifically when you were young, formative years?
Well, I think the sports just help solidify relationship with buddies that I'm still friends with today. I was never like this super competitive. I'm not a gambler. I'm not super competitive. Maybe a quiet competitor, but not a group, competitor. In high school sports, it's one of the few times that you can compete as an athlete. Education was just part of the community. Every day, went to school. I don't remember not wanting to be there because it was kind of fun. So it was just part of the community.
And what was the biggest kind of sport in town?
Well, back then was football, baseball, basketball were the three main sports. There was no lacrosse.
Yeah.
Soccer was just very early stage. We did have a hockey team. Like girls, I think played softball for sure. Swimming, our school had a pool.
Okay.
But from football, you had the weight room, so that was another extension where we'd do the weight room, and then just the fun locker room stuff.
Yeah.
That is completely silly, activity, but fun.
Yeah. Did you guys have a cool locker room?
Yeah, it was classic locker room.
Was it shared with other sports, or did football have their own locker room?
Football had their own locker room.
That's pretty cool.
But I think what would happen is that when baseball season came, that was the same locker room. So, so that's the only, because we didn't have, that was the only fall sport.
Right.
There wasn't soccer.
Interesting. And you said sports was a really good way to solidify some of those bonds with some of your buddies.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because it's just, instead of just seeing someone in school, you had a common goal that, Friday, we played Friday nights under the lights, and, you wanted to beat the opponent, and you were working together collectively as a team to beat the other school, and then you came back, showered, you went to the Dr. Pepper machine, grabbed a Dr. Pepper, and then where are we going tonight? Well, we're going to Newcomb's house, or we're going to Paron's house, or we're going to Leibiger's house, and that's what we did.
And would the whole team go, or is it just kind of groups?
It was, we were. It wouldn't be the whole team. It was like our group of friends.
Yeah. Did you guys have a rival? I'm just really curious about this. We don't stay on this topic too long, but for football, did you guys have a specific rival?
Yeah,
and how was the turnout to your games?
Friday under the lights, it was a good turnout. I don't remember if it was sold out.
Well, I remember seeing a picture from the newspaper that you showed me that was it had you and Dave.
Well,
and a couple others.
That was a playoff game.
There's a lot of people.
So there would have been a lot of people there. So we're actually, I was together with those guys a month ago, and we were looking at those photos. But it was Friday under the lights, a good crowd. Every parent basically went.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were underclassmen, you would go to the varsity game.
Yeah.
Which was kind of neat. But our school was Douglas MacArthur High School, as in the general. We were the generals.
Okay.
And then our rival, in our town there were probably 4 or 5 high schools, but in the public, and they were ranked by class size, so we were a Class B school, and the other Class B school was Eisenhower, as in Dwight David Eisenhower. So, and they were, I guess they weren't the generals. I don't know what the heck they were. Eisenhower Commanders, maybe? I don't know. But that was our rival. And we beat them every year. It was a big rival.
Okay.
And you'd see them, you'd co-pollinate with parties, you'd see them. But there was always, you had your varsity jacket on, and there would be scruffs now and then, like at McDonald's, but that's nothing, classic,
That's classic,
high school stupidity, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we covered some sailing, some sports, some education. This is going to be kind of a big jump, skipping past a little bit of career stuff. I want to touch on parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So, first question, where did you meet Mom?
We worked for the same company out of school.
Right.
So she was one of the
Dartmouth.
Dartmouth, yep, and I was the community college Greek. I remember marketing was second floor, she was in sales, first floor, and she dressed like $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Her hair was perfect, and I was standing in the second floor with this old guy, Mike Marlborough was his name, and she walked across we had a floor room with these displays, when people would come in, and it was part of the sales process, and I was like, who's that? My God, she's beautiful. And he looked at me and says, we call her Iceberg, you don't have a chance. And I said, interesting. So
her last name's Herberg.
Right. So I ended up asking her to go away for a ski weekend in January, because a group of the guys at work were going to do that, and she said yes. I'm like, wow.
That was the first time you guys talked?
First time we had a date. So we would talk before. Again, she was in marketing or sales, I was in marketing. I'd run into her maybe
water cooler talk?
Yeah, water cooler, or I remember distinctly running into her in the parking lot, and she had a VW Jetta.
Oh yeah.
And these panels, these eight panel displays, you had to cram them into your car if you were going to do a sales call. And she's there dressed to the T, and she's struggling trying to get this panel out.
This story.
And I said, hey, do you need some help? Can I help you? And she said, no, I don't need any help. I'm like, okay. And so I kept walking. And but yeah, there was interaction definitely before. I think there were a group of us that went out for drinks, so there was interaction then. But the first date was actually a ski trip.
That's a pretty big first date.
It's a huge, and we shared a room, but what's funny is I would always leave. I was super respectful. It was just because we didn't have money.
Right.
But it's like, we need two, beds, and when you shower, I'll go in the lobby, and it was that type of thing.
And just quickly, can we
She drove, too, because my car wasn't dependable enough.
The Jetta was more dependable than the...
Yes, I had a Saab 900 with a zillion miles on it, but it was in Sugarloaf, Maine.
That's funny, because Jetta, that's one we were looking at, and everyone said, don't go to Jetta.
Yeah, well, it was an 86
It's a cool
Jetta.
car, though.
Yeah.
Before we get into actual parenting, I guess this will bleed into it. Can we just get quick bullet points of stages of the relationship? So we already know, met here, first date, started officially dating, engaged this time, moved here, first kid, moved here, like that kind of bullet points.
Yeah, so we, 86, first date, we would get together, play squash.
Oh, nice.
And she lived in the city. I lived in Hingham. Actually,
Yep.
I lived in Hingham. So we'd go back and forth and do all the city stuff and hang out on the weekend. She ended up leaving Outline, got another job.
That was the marketing
yes,
company.
and I stayed there. And then I was ready for the next step. And there was a job with a lot of responsibility and much higher pay in Michigan. So I moved there. And that was a big test for the relationship.
Where in Michigan?
Saginaw, actually.
And because I actually never know. So wait, it's like this, right? For the
Yep.
if you're for the
right
camera.
right in the bottom of the thumb.
So this is Saginaw, Traverse City.
Yep, west side of the. So, my dad knew this guy that had a chain of carpet retailers, A.T. Frank, and he had one of the companies was called Mid-State Distributors, and they distributed Formica, which is like plastic covering.
Okay.
You see in a kitchen and things of that nature. And he needed help with that. And so I quit my job, told Mom we're going to do a long distance. We agreed to do a long distance relationship. But before I started that job, I wanted to do a cross country trip. So Steinbeck has a book, Travels with Charlie. And it's about how he would travel the country with his dog Charlie, and nobody knew he was a writer, and he would write about the people, whether in the South, Midwest, etc. So Mom got me this little stuffed dog animal named Charlie, and I had that 76 or 79 Saab. I folded the seat down, and I would sleep in the back, and I went from Bangor, Maine, down to Tijuana, Mexico, up to British Columbia, and back to Michigan.
Wait, why'd you go that way?
Because I was already on the East Coast.
It's quicker.
I was going cross country, so I went cross.
Wait, this isn't moving to...
No, this is before the job started.
Okay.
Before I took I think like 6 weeks to do it.
Oh, nice.
But I went that direction because my one buddy Jeff Miller was a sports writer in Dallas, so that brought me down to Dallas, and then I just kept going down. And then my other buddy Dave Pavich was working in Los Angeles, so I went there to stay with him. And then I had a cousin, Mary Jo, up in Seattle. I stayed with Mary Jo and Bill, who you've met at Patrick's wedding. And then I made my way back, and I worked at A.T. Frank for, actually, it was to run that Mid-State Distributors. He was going to pay me $30,000. And I said, what I really should do is you need help with the big company. And the day before I even started, he was going to pay me $50 to do both. And I'm 22 years old, never run a company.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I can do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you. Be no problem. So did a good job there, and that was, basically.
And that company was
A.T. Frank.
Okay.
Yeah. So from there.
And wait, you may have already mentioned it. May have just gone right over. What did they do?
It was a carpet retailer.
Okay.
So when you want to go get carpet for your house, you go there, pick out the carpet, then they order the carpet, then the installers come and take out the old carpet, put the new carpet in.
Okay.
We have all these Oriental rugs at home,
Yeah.
but some people have carpeting throughout the house, like our Vermont basement.
Yep.
So you go to a carpet store, pick out the carpet, they tear it out, put it in. So when that ended, I would get bored with the job and ready for basically the next, and I always was trying to go up. And at that point, Mom had been working with an advertising agency, Bill Durfee.
And A.T. Frank was Michigan.
Yes.
Okay.
So now I'm ready to come back, and Mom had worked with this advertising agency in Boston, and when I was coming back, she ended up going to work for her father. And so I went to Bill Durfee, who I kind of knew before that, and worked with him, and I said, I want to buy your business. I mean, this is how,
Yeah.
So I was always looking for a business to buy. So so I worked for Bill Durfee as in the account service end, and I was in downtown Boston. Mom was in Newtown, so she'd come up to visit, and
Newtown, Connecticut.
Newtown, Connecticut, exactly. And then I did that for like 9 months, and Bill Durfee said, I don't want to sell the business. I'm just going to take a few of the key accounts and work out of my house. He was ready to retire.
Mm-hmm.
So I told Mom, I said, and she was kind of it wasn't a good fit to work for her dad. So I said, where do you want to go? And we looked at Portland, Maine, or Burlington, Vermont, because I didn't want to live in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And
why?
It's very expensive.
What was rent like in Boston when I know you never lived in Boston proper, right?
I lived in Charlestown.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what was rent like there?
I think I was paying $950 maybe.
Oh, okay.
So it's for a studio.
Not
But this
that
is 40,
much cheaper
this is 40 years ago, so.
But it's not that much cheaper
Yeah.
than it is now.
But Charleston was not what it is today.
Yeah.
I mean, cars are being broken into all the time. I mean,
That's why I'm saying I would have expected it to actually be cheaper than that.
Yeah, maybe it was $850. I don't really remember. I know it was basically a little over my budget.
Mm-hmm.
It was more than I should be paying because I didn't have any furniture. I basically had a bed on the floor, and that was it. So we ended up going to Burlington, Vermont. I don't know. Yeah, we ended up going to Burlington, Vermont. So we moved up there, lived separately, and now I'm looking for a job. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go back into financial services. And because I worked for E.F. Hutton for a little bit when I was doing my senior year, I said, I can sell anything. I'm good at this. I'll just I'm not going to buy a business. I'm going to create my own business. So I'm getting out the yellow pages, and I see Merrill Lynch, Dean Witter, Smith Barney, all the different firms. And I see under Dean Witter, branch manager, R.G. Economo. I'm like, that's Greek. So.
How do you know?
I know the name.
Oh.
My priest in Saginaw is the same last name.
Okay.
So I knew, if it ends in O, O-U-S.
Yeah.
So I called him up. I said, hey, I'm Greek, and I see you're Greek, and I'd like to get a job, and I'd like to come in and see it. And he said, all right, come on in. So I came in and had my Hart Schaffner suit on, and Brooks Brothers, or not Brooks Brothers, yeah, Brooks Brothers shoes, and met him, and he says, all right, but I want you to take this aptitude test to see if you're good at sales. And it was this ridiculous thing where you had to cold call someone and try and sell them a bond. And he called back and said, well, you really didn't do well in the test. And I said, it's the most ridiculous. That has no measurement of whether you're going to be successful or not. So I had the old broker I worked with at E.F. Hutton. And
you said that to him, or that was just in your head?
No, I probably said that to him, but softly.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, I know I can do this. It's, these aptitude tests, are they really that accurate? So Bill Grau was the guy at E.F. Hutton. He wrote a letter, and Mom's dad wrote a letter. Because he had kind of followed my, kind of rise, if you will. And he says, all right. And he actually spoke to Bill Grau, and Bill Grau said, I'm a top producer at E.F. Hutton, and I didn't do well in that test. He actually played football at Michigan State.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he said, all right, so he hired me. So I worked there, and Mom was working at North Burlington High School as an ESL teacher. Cause
North Burlington High School.
North Burlington High School.
That's what it was called?
Yeah, because it's on North Ave.
Well, because now it's just BHS, Burlington High School.
Okay, maybe it was, yeah. So it was in the North End.
Yeah, which has now been torn down.
Yes, exactly. That's where she worked.
Yeah.
And she was an ESL teacher. There was a group of Vietnamese and Malaysians. You know, they were half Vietnamese, half American from the war. So, but that's how we ended up
In Burlington.
Yeah.
And you were there for how long?
2 years.
From when to when?
Boy, 90 to early 90 to the end of 91.
And you started dating in
87.
Okay.
87 was our
So
first
3
date.
years later, you moved to Burlington, stayed there for 2 years.
Yeah.
When were you engaged?
We got engaged in Burlington, in Quebec City, in 91.
Interesting. Did you go to the place you got engaged at or proposed at since you've been back? Because you went 2 summers ago.
No, I don't remember where. No, because it was. Yeah. No, I don't remember where. It wasn't like this incredibly romantic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, actually, Mom said, give me a couple days, let me think about it. You know, so it's I mean, it all worked out, but it's
That's good.
it wasn't.
It's a big decision.
She didn't leap into my arms. Oh my God.
Okay, so engaged in like 90, 91.
Yeah, 91. So, her mom had passed away in December of 91. And, I mean, she had a lot on her plate. We probably should have waited a couple more years just based on that.
Yeah.
But we forged on. So, yeah.
And then you leave Burlington and you go to Connecticut?
Well, at that point, her mom had Lou Gehrig's and Alzheimer's, and we weren't sure how long she was going to live. So it's like, we need to move to Connecticut. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to leave Dean Witter and I'll go work with your dad, but independently, I'm going to have my own business.
Okay.
And I'll rent space from him, basically.
So he's Pappy to me.
Yes.
But his name's Lynn Herberg. So Pappy owned the office building?
So he had a business where he specialized in 403B plans for public school teachers, which is like a 401k.
Yeah.
So he had this network of schools that he could solicit and generate new clients. So I said, all right. He had this third floor office that he rented, and there was a vacant office there. So I said,
This was in Newtown?
Yes.
Okay.
Right at the flagpole. So I said, I'm going to go down. I'm going to start that business there. I'm going to bring my Dean Witter clients, and then I'm going to use his network of schools to create new clients. Because he was at that stage where he says, I really don't want to be out selling, but I have these schools that you want to generate new clients.
So can you just describe to me the difference between his business and yours, like what they
So
were doing?
in Dean Witter, you were more of a general practitioner. So you were doing general financial planning for clients, with stocks and bonds and mutual funds, full service securities. He specialized in one particular area, and he didn't care if he had an IRA or a regular account. All he wanted was that, do you want to participate in the 403B plan as a school teacher? And people would put in $25, $50, $100 a paycheck, and that's how he made a living.
Okay.
So he was a specialist, I was a general practitioner.
Got it. And then you and Mom got married in
92,
92.
September 5th of 92.
Oh, so right after you got engaged. Like a year.
Maybe we got engaged. I don't remember exactly when we got engaged, but it was probably a year.
Okay. And then first kid, Jake.
2 years after we were married.
Yep. Then
2 years
Phoebe
after that.
in 96.
Yep.
So Jake in 94, Phoebe in 96,
Yep.
me in 2000.
Yeah.
And you had a couple moves throughout those years.
Well, when we were down in Connecticut, we rented. Right when we were married, we rented. And then we moved.
Okay.
We rented. And then we moved. 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 And there were two places that we rented. One was a condo, one was like half a house. And then Mom was pregnant with Jake, and we bought a house in Woodbury. So we lived in Southbury first, then moved to Woodbury.
Rented in Southbury.
Yep, rented in Woodbury, and then bought a home, our first home in Woodbury.
And when did you move your business to? And was it always called Compass Capital Management?
No, so I just was my name, and then Pappy had his name.
Yeah.
And then we had that arrangement for 5 years. And then when Jake was born, he didn't want to work anymore. And so I bought his business and then rebranded it Compass Capital.
Got it. And then moved it to Southbury.
I moved it in April of '96 to Southbury.
Okay, so when Phoebe was born.
Yep.
Or around the time when Phoebe was born. And then you moved from one place in Woodbury to another.
Yeah, we were in 152 Washington Street
Mhm.
in Woodbury, and we moved in '99 to the current house.
Yeah, okay. Got it. Okay, so that's the big bullet points of the your and Mom's relationship from start to having children, which now gets into the questions I really had about parenting. So, why did you become a parent?
Why did I become a parent? I don't remember early on saying, "Oh my God, it's important to me to be a parent." I think it was just part of the agreement that, Mom and I had a committed relationship. Parenting, having children was important to her, and I'm like, sure,
Yeah.
let's have kids.
Was any of it like that's just what you do? Like that's standard practice for?
Well, there wasn't an
what I see
argument to
around me?
say, let's not have kids.
Yeah.
So it was much more, sure, we'll have kids. That seems completely normal. And that's the normal path of being married and becoming an adult. There was never an argument that we would never have kids or, my gosh, are you sure you want to have kids? It was just more of a natural, there wasn't a lot of thought process to it.
And that's something that shifted a lot, going back to the generation stuff. Very, very different. Again, we don't have to get into it now because we'll touch on it.
Yeah.
But not the case with my generation. We'll see about the generation below me and even the generation ahead of me. So I'm Gen Z. If you talk about millennials, Gen Z, it's different than
Right.
baby boomers, Gen X, and which you guys are on the fringe of. 64. Baby boomers, I think, ends in 65. So that's interesting. We'll talk more about that. But it was just part of the agreement and something that Mom really wanted to do. And something you were happy to do as well. 2 more questions about parenting, so we know why, but then I want to know a little bit about the what. So, hardest part and best part about being a parent. And you can break it up into stages as well, from, newborn to grade school to middle school, or you could just answer it generally.
Well, let me actually go back. So you've probably heard me say this before, but I think that I married up. Your mom just, grew up a little bit different than I did, and she was just one of the smartest people that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
She was well read. She could read something and actually comprehend it and be thoughtful about it. And she wasn't like this cultured, well-traveled person, but she was really smart.
Yeah.
So embarking down that journey of, are we going to have kids? I had supreme confidence that if I'm going to go down that path, she was one that I wanted my kids to basically, our kids, to have that exposure.
Right.
So, and it's like, our kids are going to be just fine because, Mom's in the game. So the hardest part is that, I'm running my own business, I'm grinding it out. Mom wasn't working, which was a godsend, so it really was time management. So I was trying to help as much as I could, but I really, the office took a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And hindsight's 20/20. I should have I didn't need to grind as hard as I did. I could have, helped out a little bit more. But in the morning I helped. I did all the nighttime routine so mom could sleep. And I got home and she basically handed the kids to say, here they are, and she went to take a bath.
So you said you didn't have to, you probably could have had a little more leeway. That's something you hear a lot with people that are high performers, type A, busybody people looking back on life, said, I actually could have maybe given myself a little bit more.
Completely.
Do you have specific examples? Is it like, and man, maybe instead of saying till the office till 9, I could have left at 7? Or
well,
like...
I would bring a lot of stuff home. So the example was that I could have hired more people. I could have delegated more. But I was always from the school that if you want to do it right, do it yourself.
Right.
So, later part of the career, I delegated a lot more. And also, you were trying to mitigate risk, so the more people you hired, there was more risk in the business.
Right.
Because your overhead was more. And did we outgrow our space? And we ultimately did, and we had to move to another, office location. But it's really time management and making sure you invest enough time in the relationship. And 9 times out of 10, that is a consequence of children, is that the relationship, gets short. There's just so much time and energy to go around.
Yeah. So that's the hardest part. Is the
Hardest
time
part,
management,
time management,
balancing, and sacrifice.
You're always tired. If you're going to do it right, it's 100% focus on the child, and you come second. And the relationship comes second. Your quote unquote marriage comes second. So that's the hardest part, and you're tired, you're fatigued, you're burning the candle on both ends, and it's hard to come up for air.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, 20 years goes by.
Yeah. That's.
But it's the whole thing where you have one child, then 2 and 3, and mom wanted 4. I don't know why we didn't have 4. We could have had 4, but you're like, corralling cats a little bit.
Yeah.
1 is easy, 2 is hand-to-hand combat, 3 you're corralling cats, and 4. But we could have easily had 4.
Okay, so that's the hardest part. And then what was the best part, the most fulfilling part? However you want to answer.
Well, I think the fulfilling part is, to see the progress to see your kids, how they grow, how they develop. You have successes and failures. You want to make sure the failures are superficial. Nothing, is a terrible one. And I think to have the discussions that we have, or Jake and I, or Phoebe have, about life, that's the really fruitful part, is that now you have an adult relationship with your children. And they'll ask for advice. Sometimes they take it, sometimes they don't. Or you can talk about politics, you can talk about religion, you can talk about life choices, and it's pretty fruitful.
Okay, so those are good answers. Thank you. We'll probably touch a little bit more on parenting when we go to our discussion about generations, but I want to shift. I guess it's kind of adjacent to parenting. Maybe it obviously started beforehand, but a lot of overlap. Career, which we've already talked a little bit about, and you've talked about balance and time management. But how did you balance work and family?
You just made it work. I don't think there was a lot of thought process where mom knew I had to get things done, and I tried to support her in the process. I would bring work home at night. So what would happen is that, there'd be leftover, and we never had dinner as a family, during the week. So I'd come home well after 7. I'd put you guys to bed, basically get out of my suit, put you guys to bed, try and get something to eat. and then I would go to my desk and I would do paperwork for an hour, and then Mom would be in bed reading or asleep, and so the balance was that on the weekends I would try and take you guys to the office to give Mom a break so she could get caught up, and we'd go to Subway, get Subway sandwiches and
I didn't
little
realize that
toys.
was on the weekends.
Yeah.
So I obviously remember going. But
Yeah. And we would have, I had the little TV in the conference room, and we'd watch Land Before Time and different Disney movies, and I would be catching up so I could hit the ground running on Monday.
Yeah. Well, I just remember I would be playing like on computer games on like one of the computers.
Yeah.
And I would eat so many M&Ms from like the entrance bowl.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would eat a lot of snacks. But I remember that. It was fun. Okay, so just...
And the other thing is just try and help as much as you can. Dishes, laundry, cleaning up. It was never this traditional role that women did one thing, men did the other. It was like all hand-to-hand combat and whatever you need. And don't wait to be asked. Just do it.
So I wanted to talk about balancing work and family, which you just answered, saying it's just you're just doing your best and just...
The other good balance with that, though, is that having your own business, I don't think I missed a whole lot of games.
Yeah.
Especially middle school, when you were, when you guys were doing Park and Rec, it was typically on the weekends. But once high school started, in middle school, if there was a game and it was within reason, where you're not driving to, far away, I would be at the game.
Yeah.
So I would pencil it in.
Yeah. And then I guess you just mentioned having your own business, and we already talked about building CCM, Compass Capital Management. But was there anything that stands out as really challenging or even really fun about building your own business?
I never looked at it as fun.
Yeah.
I looked at it at, am I good at it? And can I basically grind this out? And can it be financially, beneficial? So I didn't care what the industry was. I didn't care if it was widgets, manufacturing. I didn't care. It had to have certain components like recurring revenue, where you didn't start from scratch in January. It was something that you can build on. And I knew that if I could grind this out, you were grossly underpaid in the early years and you were grossly overpaid in the later years. You needed critical mass, and that was a good business where you were, once you had a client, then you got another client, and you were generating fees off each client. But I don't remember it being fun, because it just consumed so much time, and I was tired. But every morning you got up, shaved, put your suit on, and you went.
Yeah. It's more practicality over passion.
Yeah, it was complete. I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't. The passion was never. That wasn't a motivator.
Did you have to deal? Well, I imagine you had to deal with some level of burnout, especially when you're doing something that's not
completely.
super fun.
I did burn out. That's
about.
why I ended up selling the business.
Yeah.
Is that when a couple things. One is that I always had a chip on my shoulder from the educational point of view.
Because you went to a community college.
Community college, and it was a very untraditional kind of hodgepodge, education, and I didn't feel comfortable telling people that I went to community college until I had a net worth that reached a particular number. And then it was like a badge of honor then that I went to,
right?
Because I was more successful than people that went to Michigan or wherever, which is very shallow, but that was basically how I operated. So so it was all this. I needed a business where I wanted to create net worth, and being financially secure and having a high net worth, which was part of my internal identity. And once I started reaching particular goals, and there were goals that were substantially more than my original goal, I started to question, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
because I'm not jumping out of bed having fun. I'm not a doctor saving lives. I'm not in the ER room. So making more money and saving more money became a little bit shallow once you reach a particular goal. And I said, I could have a lot more, and what would I do with it if I just kept grinding? So I ended up selling the business in my 40s, but it was an arrangement where I could stay on and work, and so the throttle really pulled back, probably at 50. I mean, the landing gear was out, and I was just kind of coasting.
Mm-hmm. But from 22, really,
yeah,
to 50.
Yeah, no, it was a good 25.
Yeah.
Year grind.
Yeah, it's a long time. And so, current status of CCM is, what's the name of the parent company?
It's called Blue Springs.
Blue Springs, right?
So they're out of Austin, Texas. They own it. My role now is kind of an emeritus president, where I'm still on the payroll. I do some client service, but I have complete control of my schedule. Really no responsibility, which is ideal. And I'll do that for another 2 years, and then evaluate. Most likely, I probably will just not work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be 63 at that point, and I'll turn the page, and life's a chapter book.
Right. So what chapter would you be flipping to, do you think, if you could name it? I've heard that asked on another podcast.
Well, I'm in that chapter now, so the formality of not working is just I no longer get a paycheck.
Yeah.
So I think the chapter I'm in now is I have for the most part, complete flexibility in my schedule. It allows me to go on tangents, whether it's a tangent of curiosity, a tangent of travel. It could be a tangent on a bucket list, like biking across the country. I could never do a 6-week boat trip like this when I was active in the business.
Right.
Never. I mean, literally, you have a forwarding on your email where it says I'm out of the office until basically. I've done that twice in my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
One was the bike trip, and here, July 22nd, I said I will not be back in the office until September 9th.
Yeah. Well,
whatever that Monday is.
Wow.
So I look at my email, but I would get a call if maybe a client died or something like that, but I'm basically not working.
Yeah. Okay, so then this is connected to the career stuff, but a little bit more broad scoping and connects to other parts of life. So I wanted to talk about leadership. So obviously you mentioned you're president emeritus,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned briefly that you were student body president at
Student government president. Yep.
At the I can't remember the
Northwestern Michigan
Michigan College. So you've had experiences, obviously, as a leader and you're a business owner. What do you think are the most important qualities of a leader?
Well, I think leading by example, and a good example is when I'm in the office. In the old days, I would vacuum. I would do things that I would never ask people to do.
Mm-hmm.
So a client would come in, we'd bring coffee, and when the client left, I would always do the dishes. I wouldn't assume someone else was going to
Mm-hmm.
do the dishes. And to be just a really good listener, where I think part of that when you're dealing with people all the time, where I did, is you really need to be a good listener and try and solve problems. I think if you do that quietly, I think there's leadership. So you don't have to be a loud vocal leader. You can be a quiet leader.
Right. It's a reference to Patrick DePeter's podcast.
It really wasn't. It was not, but it's we'll call.
Well, it's
we'll
true.
Say it is.
It's true. But you're talking about just leading by example, with the dishes example, and I think it's in line with some of my views about just a leader does everything that they would ask anyone to do, and more.
Yeah.
it has to be more.
What is interesting throughout my little career, I always had these awards. I was always the top producer, and I hated those awards, and I basically threw them out. And I used to always tell people I want to be like Barry Sanders and just basically quit at the top of my game, and just don't show up one day, and kind of pivot and do something else. So many people that are in a sales environment, they relish getting these top producer awards, and it was like, I'm not doing it to get this award. Now I can be there essentially if people were like, well, how did you get there, or what did you do that was special? So you would kind of be a leader in that way, but I hated that whole process of awards. It didn't mean anything.
Right.
But anyway.
So those are some qualities of a leader. Do you have any leadership mentors that kind of embody some of those things?
Leadership mentors. I think a lot of the friends that I grew up with. One thing that's interesting is that coming from a town like Saginaw, which is classic middle America, maybe lower income, not it wasn't an Ivy League environment, but there are so many people in my class that achieve really great financial success. And it's interesting that how we all grew up, and we're all friends, and if you got out a piece of paper and drew down their net worths, it would be like, are you kidding me? You guys all came from the same high school and the same class, and you guys are all friends. And again, luck plays a big role, but we all, we were all just grinders. And we were smart in our own different way. Some more academic, book smart, other people just more people smart. And it's kind of a cool American
it's really
dream.
Cool. So your friends or your leadership mentors, were there any other shared characteristics you think among your group other than just being grinders, as you call it?
Well, I remember, that first job at Outline, and my buddy Jim Zadella was at Manufacturers National Bank, and I could call him at 7:30 in the morning, and I knew he'd be at his desk. And a lot of times we would just share stories about what's going on at the bank, what's going on here, how maybe there's going to be our marketing department basically got reduced, and I would talk to him about, I think I might lose my job. No. So I went to the president of the company to say, listen, don't fire me, put me in sales. So that was my first introduction to sales, and then it was just interesting where my income went from X to Y, and then Jim would come out and we'd go on sales calls together.
That's awesome.
So he's working for a bank, and we'd hop in the car, we'd go, I was Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Boston. Downtown Boston was my territory. So we'd go on 5 sales calls, and then he'd come back and we'd hit the bars, and then he'd fly back on Sunday. But that to me, I think, is great mentorship. There's friendship, obviously, but there's mentorship because we're both on this path, we're both learning. But there was no real senior mentor that I looked at.
Peer leadership.
Yeah, it was all peer leadership. Because half the time I would try and talk to my dad about what's going on, but he didn't understand business. My brother didn't understand business, so it was a little bit of a vacuum there. So there was that's a good way to put it, there was a lot of peer leadership going on.
And did anything kind of change about your beliefs of what leadership is from when you were young, when you were 20, what were you, 25, 26 when you started in Newtown?
I was 26, I think.
So from then, when you were first, I guess, leadership started earlier, when you were student government president, but really when you started your business and you were that young versus you go to now, with kind of the setup you have, how have your beliefs about leadership changed?
Yeah. So early on, I was a lone wolf. So you didn't really have staff. You just did it yourself.
Mhm.
And as staff grew, one thing I realized is that when you have staff turnover, when people leave, it's very disruptive to a business. So you need to make sure you hire people that are, good people that are hardworking, and you really treat them with respect, and you give them autonomy to basically create their own little business within your business. So if you micromanage those people, they're not going to be around long.
Yeah.
So you really have to have faith that they're going to do it, and if they don't do it the right way, you really have to be gentle but firm on how to give them instructions and accept responsibility. If they didn't do it the right way, maybe it was me that didn't actually give them the right guidance on basically what needed to be done. So consequently, in our little business, is that I've had no turnover. People have worked for the office for 25 to 20 years. They are overly paid for basically what they do, but I know the job's going to get done, and it allowed me to actually earn more because they were doing, really fantastic work.
That's interesting, because one of the things we're going to touch on later is something I've been toying with a lot in my head is life zero sum is a positive sum. So what you're describing there is it's a positive sum game. You give to others, and everyone wins. Like, it's not like, oh, because I'm giving to them, I'm losing.
Yeah. I remember when I sold the business, and Blue Springs looked at what I was paying these people, and they're like, you're way overpaying.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, and this is why the business is so valuable, and this is why you're paying me X to buy the business, is because these guys are rock stars. Now, in the open market, if they left, they were almost trapped to a degree where if they left, they could never get what I was paying them. And it was one of these things where, you know what, I'm going to just stay here forever.
Yeah.
But, they needed to produce too. It wasn't just like, Karen is one of the gals that work for me. She would leave when I left, and if it was 9 o'clock, if I was there on a weekend, she was there on a weekend. And I never had to ask her.
Yeah.
She just did it. So there's a lot of modeling, whether it's peer-to-peer modeling, or maybe your work ethic is tied to modeling that, from maybe watching how I worked, and maybe there's a little things that rub out. But it's there's a leadership. You don't have to. You can have leadership skills without actually saying something. It's just doing it.
Yeah. And I liked what you said a little bit earlier about, as a leader, if someone does something wrong, and I think this ties in a lot with like coaching. It's like, well, maybe let me look at me first,
right?
Because that's also leading by example, because you want employees and team members. You should prefer team members who first look in the mirror before pointing fingers.
Yeah.
So if you do that as a leader, they'll do that as.
Yeah, I learned that just early on, is that you want the barriers to come down from a learning point of view, and you want it to be easy. So the easiest thing is just accept responsibility. This was my fault. Let's figure out how it doesn't happen again. Instead of saying, how'd you screw up this the second time? And you always talk about giving people the benefit of the doubt if they're having a bad day. The other thing with leadership is, when you're listening, I always have my door open, never shut, and you could hear what's going on in the office. And I remember one time, one employee, Kathy, I could hear that she was invited to a wedding and she couldn't afford it. And I just, so casually, it's like, who's getting married? Oh, so-and-so, I'd love to go, but I just can't. And with the right setting, I said, listen, I got these airline miles. I really want you to go. Why don't you take these miles and you go on this wedding trip and take a couple days off? And she was like almost in tears. Are you kidding me? And it meant everything. And she said, how can I pay you back? I said, why don't you babysit one night? And so, and I can go out.
That's nice.
And her husband was a teacher, and he came over, had a fire going in the fireplace in the kitchen. He brought his briefcase, and he was correcting, papers. And they had the great, you guys were great. You went right up to bed, and it was a nice thing for Ann and I to go out. And it was a win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
But she remembered that, and she stayed with me until she retired.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And she was a great employee. She's fun, reliable. If I asked her to do something, I knew it was going to get done. And a lot of these employees were not, college educated.
Really?
No, none of them.
None of
the three main ones did not go to college. Laura might have went to community college.
What did they do before?
They
because when do you hire them? Like,
one was, Karen's been there 25 years. She worked part-time for another financial services firm. Laura worked at a bank, and Kathy, I don't know if Kathy was even working. I know she had a child, and she was divorced. I don't know. I knew that after my interview, I did chase her in the parking lot and said, "You need to work for me."
Really?
Yes. And she's...
Why? What happened in the interview?
I just had a sense that she was going to be one of these people that she was going to learn quickly, she was going to be dependable, she needed the job, and she was going to be a great employee, and she was.
That's awesome. That's a cool story. So we have your most important qualities as a leader, some leadership mentors, which was your friend group mainly, and we have basically how your beliefs about leadership changed. Which was just to recap for my own sake. Early on, you were alone. It was more like lone wolf, so there wasn't. It was more just like self leadership.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of learning along the way, and then going back into your most important qualities as a leader is about leading by example. It's about listening. It was about treating people really well.
Doing what you're also, one thing that maybe this could have been from, my parents is that, it was always a firm handshake, always look someone in the eye, and do what you say you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that dependability
is
a key thing. So if you, and I think with employees, if they know you're completely dependable and reliable, and you never back down on what you say you're going to do, they want to be on that team. They want to get on that bus. And I think that's part of it, where I went on this bike trip, across country, and I had this roommate, and at the end he was like, "Buddy, I love you. I'll go any place with you. I'll go to war with you." And it kind of made me think back to say, what did I do to have that kind of impression on him? Well, actually, I'm going to see him on this boat trip. But it was just, I think, the reliability. You get up every day. You're calm and collective. You're on this journey across the country. If someone needs help, you're the first one to help. And you don't have attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is just, that people want that on your team.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Those are being quick to help and being reliable and not letting I don't want to say not letting some emotion show, but just having a good attitude around everyone, even if it's not your day.
Yeah, and I think being like-minded and protective is a good, there were a couple women on the trip, and there was one of the guides who basically was a little disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
So we were like this unified front, is that don't pick on these women and don't talk down, because we're going to give you a beating,
Mm-hmm.
if you do that. So that was, I think, part of it, that there was a bit of a warrior thing, is that this was our posse.
Yeah.
And we're going to defend our posse.
And this is your cross-country bike trip you're talking about, which we're going to talk about actually next. So we discussed career, we discussed leadership, which ties into career, and then I want to talk about drive, which kind of connects to everything, because you needed a strong drive to manage parenting several children, running your own business, and basically developing yourself as a person, coming from Michigan and an educational background that you described as something you weren't originally proud of. So coming from that to really developing into someone that's, at least materialistically very successful, but also emotionally and in other ways successful. So that obviously requires drive. So again, very relevant to work, but very clearly seeped in other parts of your life. So you've ran 10 marathons? 10 marathons, cross-country bike race recently.
Not race, just as cross-country, yeah. There's no winners or losers.
Cross-country bike event with your posse, as you described. Saving and other time management things for your children. You've had a recent kick in health and longevity, which requires drive. And so what inspired that drive? I know you mentioned you had a chip on your shoulder. You felt from your educational background, but what really inspired it?
The chip was always was there probably early on. So money was going to be, my financial security, not money, was going to be kind of the thing that I wanted to, that was the internal goal. And it's shallow. So when you talk about materialistic, I don't think that materialism is not, that's not a driver. It's really being financially secure and having goals. So I think the marathon issue was that my first marathon, I was probably in my 40s, and it wasn't so much that I wanted a particular time, it was a mental commitment. So that whole journey of, putting round pegs in square holes for a long time, was that mental journey of a career. And when the career was kind of winding down, or when the landing gear was out and the throttle was coming back a little bit, the marathon was like, I can do this marathon. I'm going to be on the road for 3+ hours, and that's going to be a goal. And so then it was going to be, there was a charitable component to the marathon, because the first one you guys all came, and then the second one, I think I was alone, and I said, okay, I'm going to keep doing this, but there's got to be a cause.
Yeah.
So I ran for 2 or 3 charities, I think 4 charities to do that, and then kind of the goal was that I want to do 10, and then move on.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that the goal was kind of like, I don't want to train. I just, I'm active, I'm kind of in good shape, but I just want to show up and just run a marathon. And I don't care if it took 4 hours or 3 hours and 50 minutes, but all this training nonsense is that you really want to, a mental challenge is show up and run 26.2.
This training nonsense. That's funny. The last one took a little while.
Yeah, too. That last one was the worst. Because, why? Because it was going to be a half marathon, and then you call up in April to say, hey, there's a couple open slots, let's do a full marathon. I'm like, all right, I have a month to get my act together.
Well, I didn't want to do a half and then a full, because I knew if I did a half, I wouldn't want to do the full.
Yeah, well, it worked out. It's just a little slow.
But we ran a good portion together.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like we've done a ton of setup, which is just selfishly for me wanting to hear we obviously didn't hear your whole story, but a pretty thorough rundown of your story, just for me to hear, because I have never heard it start to finish, or start to now. But I think it will be helpful to kind of inform these next discussions, which are more about beliefs and concepts and some current event stuff, which is what I'm really excited for. So we've talked a couple times about how we're going to discuss generations. So we talked about parenting, views on parenting is different across generations. We talked about how some of your parents' beliefs were different than yours or mine because of certain events that happened in their formative years that influenced their politics and their personal philosophies. And we were listening to something last night. It was, what was it, Aspen something?
The Aspen Institute.
The Aspen Institute, and it was about young people trusting their elders.
Right.
And this was last year, so young people is Gen Z / whatever the one is after that. And they were talking about the formative events that happened for, let's say,
It could have been 9/11. It could have been.
that was millennials. Millennials
Right.
saw 9/11 and the unity that followed. Gen X saw, which was the Miracle on Ice.
That was in 1980. That was the Russians against the U.S. hockey.
So that would have been the boomers.
Yeah, that would have been me.
Yeah, so the boomers saw the Miracle on Ice and the unity that followed that because the Cold
And the
War.
Berlin Wall.
Berlin Wall for the
Yeah.
Gen
Fall-
X.
Yeah. So really the fall of communism, if you will,
Right.
and the free market entering, the Soviet Union.
But the episode was about how those events were really important for those three generations because they saw a nation unified and they had belief in the country and what it could be. And this newer generation, my generation, hasn't really had that moment of unity. And you see a lot of people my age, a couple years older, a couple years younger, that are really disenchanted with the country and the state because they haven't really seen a unified country that we hear you guys talk about. It's very polarized. It's very divided. At least it feels that way. But anyway, we're gonna get into some political stuff more. But I just thought that was really interesting, and that's kind of the basis of why I want to talk about generations. Is podcasts like that and discussions like that, which really highlight how different events in different generations really impacted a whole group of people. Obviously not everyone in the same way, but in a way that you can kind of generalize a little bit. So you're a baby boomer, barely. Cutoff is in 65, and you were born in 64. Same as mom.
Mom was 63. November 63. So
she's also a baby
Yes.
boomer.
Yeah.
And your parents are the silent generation.
Yep.
I'm a Gen Zer. So between those three generations, and we could talk about the others, Gen X, Millennial, what are the biggest differences? Good and the bad.
Well, my parents' generation had the draft.
Yep.
So my dad, served in the Korean War. They also saw, JFK assassinated,
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the moon, landing. So there was a period of, and they were alive during, Vietnam too. So they really saw the way they grew up, which was really apple pie America.
Yeah.
To
What does that mean?
apple pie is just small town America where everyone went to church and everyone had a flag in front of their house, and it was a very innocent kind of homey type of. There weren't wars. You went from basically World War II, the end of World War II, and 45 to Korean War. And the Korean War was kind of short, and then Vietnam was, in the 60s. But also in that period is that, hippies, drugs, rock and roll, that generation started to believe and not go to church, if you will.
This is...
This would have been kind of during, that was the baby boom,
Okay.
But they lived through it, but it didn't necessarily affect them fully. So that's, and again, our generation, there really wasn't a lot of conflict growing up.
But what would you say is, like, if you could, again, you can generalize a little bit with when you're looking at generations, but obviously we don't want to say everyone's like this, everyone's like that, but do you see any big differences between belief systems or attitude or ways of approaching the world between silent generation, baby boomers, and then
Yeah,
Gen
I think
Z?
baby boomers and the silent generation, I would say, are much more optimistic
Okay.
about, you follow the rules, you work hard, you get married, and you can have a successful life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I never worried about climate change or racial injustice, or it was never on my radar. And I think your generation is questioning that if I work hard, I can't even afford a house.
Mm-hmm.
And if I work hard and get married, why would I even have kids and bring kids into this world, when the planet's going to burn down?
Right.
and the politicians can't even get along, and how optimistic am I in about the future? So, and then you put social media and the internet on top of that, and it's not only an accelerant, but it's a magnifier
Yeah.
to the problems. We didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet, we had 3 television stations, and we had rotary phones. Rotary phones where you have
Yeah.
to dial, and so there was no magnifier of these social issues. You guys have a giant magnifying glass, so when there's an issue, you see it in 3D
Right.
and constant. It's in your face all the time.
Which is good and bad. A lot of people have mixed feelings about. Well, I'd say a lot of people have really negative feelings, especially people older than my generation, because they see it as a cause of issue, which in some instances it is, but I see it more as like it's a magnifying glass. It exposes issues. It exposes the flaws and the insecurities in people, specifically in young people, but that is a big product of their parents that raised them. So you're getting to, I don't know, I think, yeah, it exposes things, it magnifies them, but I don't really believe social media in itself causes issues. I think it's a tool that's used in good and bad ways, but in and of itself, I think it's neutral.
Well, I think 2 things though. With a magnifying glass, either it's going to give some people clarity, or their hand's going to be there and their hand's going to get burned. And so I think what I mean by that is that if you're subject to if you're not strong, or if you're not balanced, or you don't have a particular belief system, you can go down this rabbit hole and it can really paralyze you. Where someone else, same generation, might be able to really look at that to say, okay, I see these issues, I see where they're going, I need to work around that, and maybe I can try and help and fix it. Where I think before, if you didn't have that magnifying glass, you had less people have mental health issues, because everyone was kind of at a baseline, where now you can have these highs and lows, and I think the magnifying glass creates it.
I'm not sure I agree that it was like this before. I think maybe it could have looked like that, because there was no social media. I feel like it just stress tests everything. It really tests you. It applies pressure to things. Whereas when you didn't have it, it may have felt like this, but it was really because there was no magnifying glass. There's no pressure on it. So I think the insecurities, the flaws in people and in society was still there. It just wasn't. It didn't have a spotlight on it, so you didn't see it. That's what I think. That's what from the That's very vague and kind of a broad sweeping statement, but I really do think it's more of a neutral tool that exposes things for what they are, which I think is a net positive. It's not to say bad things haven't happened in connection to it, because many things have, but that's just my opinion. So going back to generations, specifically to you, how do you think events from your generation have shaped how you believe and how you think?
I think early on there were no real events in childhood, or even up until 9/11 was the first event that would have created you to think about things. Mm-hmm. And then 2008 was the next event. But I was pretty much into a career and pretty much into life, where those events they were non-issues for me. I just kind of moved on.
Yeah.
I think the bigger issue that makes you really reflective is that when you see what happens to your kids with social media, and you see their journey and how social media and the dysfunction of the world is affecting them that's a far greater, because I've told you this before, is that you have a bad day, it's no big deal. You lose money, it's no big deal. You lose your job, it's no big deal. Something happens to your kids and the world ends.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to figure out, how can I, it's like this panic, how can I, fix this? Just off topic, 6:25. I don't know if Jake's actually been calling or can't get into the
I can check my phone
boat
right
area. Why don't you check that real quick, because he could actually be outside.
Well, he said he was leaving at 4:15, so I
Okay.
bet he didn't leave. He might not even be left yet. He hasn't texted. Okay.
All right.
But yeah, I'll keep my computer open. Also, you want water?
Nope, I'm good.
Talk about generations. We've already talked about that a lot though recently. I think maybe we want to move on to. Want to talk about a little bit about beliefs. We touched on zero sum, and a few things we talked about 2 nights ago, like working smart versus working hard, and those are the main two. Let's talk about. I like asking people this one. Do you think life is a zero-sum game, as opposed to positive sum? So zero sum. For me to win, someone else has to lose. Positive sum, we can all win together. I ask because I was thinking a lot about this from like a financial perspective. I'm like, so for an individual, and maybe this isn't even possible to answer, or maybe it's just too complex to answer, but like in the US, for example, for someone to make money or accumulate a certain amount of wealth, does that mean that others have to pay the price? They have to, for someone to have a much higher quality of life, are other people paying the price of their accumulation of wealth?
Yeah, I don't think it's a binary yes or no. I think there are certain activities and aspects of life that everyone can win.
Mm-hmm.
It could be in a Montessori setting, a school setting where everyone is winning and everyone, rises. Capitalism, you do have winners and losers, right? But I think that people that create wealth do pay taxes, and that those tax revenues do go back to social programs where, other people are going to benefit. So I don't believe in the zero sum game where if I can make $1 and work really hard, that I'm pulling financial resources from another person that's working equally as hard.
I think it also depends if you're looking at a community or a country as opposed to the world.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at a country, obviously if a country is producing something really well and they're getting like lots of, if they're able to produce within, like the US is able to produce something really well within their country and other countries are buying it, then they're obviously raising everyone up. But if you're talking about like in the whole world, I'm just curious because if someone accumulates a certain amount of wealth, are you taking from others? And if everyone gets more wealth, are they even get, like, from a dollars and cents perspective, if everyone gets more wealth, is it really changing anything? Because then it's just the weight of that currency just getting lower? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, let's look at the tax situation. So if you're in a European country, whether it's Finland or wherever, and they have much higher taxes, so there's higher taxes based on everyone that works. And those taxes are going back to raise the boat for everyone, whether it's social programs, free college, free, I shouldn't say, the word free has different meanings, but, you're providing for the
Taxpayer
for
funded
the
or whatever.
taxpayer funded for college education, college, healthcare, things of that nature. So in that environment, you do have less disparity between the very wealthy and the less fortunate. Capitalism, by definition, you tend to have a bigger spread between the more wealthy and the less fortunate, and there has to be a better balance. I think maybe we need more taxes, or we need to allocate the revenue that we have in a more efficient way to provide, a bigger and better backstop for the less fortunate. So, I guess I don't believe in the zero-sum game. I think it's a function of, it's almost like if you said, what's your political beliefs? It would be like, well, tell me what the question is and I'll tell you what I believe in.
Yeah.
So I'm not in a particular camp. I could be conservative on one issue and liberal on the other. And I think that zero-sum game question pertains to that as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay.
I think in sports, if you have a roster spot and someone got cut, is that a zero-sum game that you are the winner of that roster spot and someone isn't? It's kind of binary. I mean, it's
there's components. I was actually having a conversation with one of my old professors, Peter Dodds, the other day about this, and I asked him the same thing. I was like, do you think life is zero sum, specifically about more like more financial, economic side of things, and I used sports as an example of something that is zero sum. I'm like, well, obviously sports is zero sum because you either win or you don't. William's like, yes, actually components of it are, but like you look at the NBA, if the games are more competitive and they have some big personalities and some really talented players, they get more eyes on the league, which actually benefits everyone. All the players are going to start earning more.
Right.
So
But it takes away from the ticket holders who are going to have to pay more to finance those higher salaries. So I think the people, the wealthy people, what happens is the owners benefit because their franchise is going to be worth more, and all the players that have contracts might benefit, but the money's got to come from someplace. Yeah. Either TV viewership is going to pay for it, which means that the guy working at the factory who pays $20 for cable is not going to pay $25 for cable, and the people that want to go to a sports game is going to pay $50 a ticket instead of $35.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Going back to the bigger picture, the money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
So again, it's really hard to even fathom when you're looking at things on a global scale, but logically to me it just seems like for someone to benefit, someone else has to lose when you're talking about money.
What you're talking about is life, and I think if you're more granular, I think you can have a much more meaningful dialogue.
I guess I was talking about wealth.
Yeah. Well, wealth is like life, though. That's I think it has to be more granular than that. Mm-hmm. So it could very well be zero-sum gain, but it's got to be granular to really life and wealth are too broad, I think.
Yeah. This is another interesting one. We talked about it. I can't remember the name of the town we were in 2 nights ago, but it was about, do you think it has to be hard? So I've always had, sounds like you and your friends had a philosophy adjacent to this, that you just grind it out. You put the square peg in the hole, round hole.
Yeah, round
square
hole,
peg
right.
in the round hole. You just kind of make it happen. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I kind of had that same philosophy, where it's like it has to be hard. You just have to grit it out. You have to do what's hard. The harder it is, the more benefit you're gonna get. If it's not hard, you're actually not doing anything productive. You're falling behind. Like it has to be hard. And that was like a kind of sports oriented mindset I got from sports, but I kind of used it and have used it in other areas of life, like I guess work, but now it's starting to come into question a little bit. And I've heard a couple conflicting quotes. We mentioned Patrick DePeters, who has the Quiet Leaders podcast and is an entrepreneur, so is in that world of Grindset, gritting it out. But he told me something a couple months ago. He said, yeah, a friend told me recently, it doesn't have to be hard. And he had like an epiphany moment, like, wait, yeah, I guess it doesn't. And I was thinking, well, I think maybe it does, but maybe there's something there because, I see a lot of times when you're just relaxed and you're not worried about things, you don't really care about the outcome, that's when you're at your best. That's when I'm at my best in sports and just in life. When I'm like kind of carefree, I feel like I perform better and actually my output is better than when I'm really focused on my output and really trying to like grit it out. But then there's this other quote that I have kind of lived by over the past, I don't know, five years or so, which is we all must suffer from one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. And that's kind of that Grindset, gritted out type of philosophy where it's like, it's gonna be hard, you have to do it, so either run into what's hard or stay complacent and things are just gonna get hard. Like everyday things are just gonna be hard for you if you don't challenge yourself.
Two comments. One is that when you talk about grinding and being hard and then you look at effort, I think there are two different things. You say it doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't mean that it doesn't require significant effort. So I think hard is that you have this tunnel vision that you're just going to go through brick walls to do it, where I think having significant effort and thinking about the effort and what's required is probably a wiser way than just getting a bigger hammer.
Yeah.
So that's a different approach. So maybe Patrick's epiphany is that maybe I don't need a bigger hammer, maybe what I need is a smarter hammer. But there's no replacement for effort. I mean, there's no shortcut.
Yeah.
It's just like creating wealth. They always say, the best way to create wealth is the old-fashioned way, slowly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
So would you say you agree with that? It doesn't have to be hard?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be hard, but most things require significant effort.
Well, I feel like effort is hard. Like real.
No, because I think
effort.
working 12-hour days is obviously effort. But if you're fatigued and you're not working smart and you're grinding it out, maybe working 9 hours, maybe you're going to be more efficient.
Yeah.
There is this mindset that you want to be the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I get this badge of honor.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay, but at the end of the day, it's what you produce.
What do you
if you
actually
produce
do?
more, getting in at 9 and leaving at 4, because you're more balanced and you're less fatigued.
Yeah. That's a tough one. That one sometimes goes through my head. I'm like happy that I got in early, but then it's like, why did I even do that?
But I think you have to measure your own output.
Yeah.
And if you need to engage, the people that you work with to say, listen, I've tried both ways, and what I have found for me personally, and it is personal, that working this schedule in this amount of time, I can actually produce more because I get fatigued and I'm writing code and I'm looking at it and it becomes blurry and
Yeah. This goes into my next question. So I wanted to ask you, what's something that your mind knows logically to be true, but your heart has to experience to be sure? So like, for example, I know logically that working from 7 to 9, like 2 weeks in a row, is gonna burn me out, and I'll actually probably produce less than if I just pumped the brakes a little bit and got some sleep. But sometimes, like, even though you know that logically, you still think you have to do it. Or like, I'm trying to think of another example. But you know what I mean? Like, you know it logically to be true, but like, you still kind of have to just like try it anyway. To like, so you're kind of, your heart knows it.
I don't. I don't know. I mean, it's. Say that again. I mean, that's.
I'm trying to think of a better example. Like, there's things that you know logically are the right decision.
Yeah.
Like, just based on logic. But you just kind of have to make the opposite decision so that you experience the outcome of the wrong decision, so you know for certain.
Yeah.
Because there's like, you can listen to wisdom and be like,
Yeah.
oh, I know this is the wrong decision because like 1,000 people have told me, but I have to.
So I've a lot of those decisions, and maybe I've oversimplified this. I always try and look at, don't try and make a fatal error.
Mm-hmm.
So when you make those little decisions, they to your point, where I know what the answer is, but I did this. If it's not a fatal error, it doesn't mean anything. It's a little scab. It's going to heal, and I move on, and I don't dwell on it. So I try and really, we're going to all make those decisions. I think it's.
Just want to check, Jake.
Yeah.
We're all gonna make those decisions.
Yeah, because I don't know if he gets phone service here.
That was also a problem for me when I was going out.
Can you send a text?
Yeah. Is it ETA? Okay.
So that's why I never really worried all that much about that type of question, because the staple or the primary goal was that don't make fatal errors. And so life, you can't control every aspect of life, and I know I'm going to make those stupid decisions, and it's normal. Just don't make sure it's not fatal.
Yeah. I think that's good.
So then you don't dwell on that, where it's say, oh my God, I knew this was going to happen. I shouldn't have done that. Well, it's not consequential. So it's like, well, don't worry about it. Move on.
Okay, I want to shift into politics a little
Yeah.
bit. So, seems like general sentiment, speaking about the U.S., is that things are more polarized, things are more divisive. I've only known kind of that narrative since I've become like at least somewhat aware of what's going on in the political sphere. Do you feel like politics is actually more polarized now, or are we simply more connected with that magnifying glass of social media and thus able to more easily see? Let me just finish the question. And thus able to more easily see opinions vastly different than our own.
No, I think it's definitely more polarized.
I'm just going to check the text with me. Oh, he's coming. He's going to be here in 45 minutes.
Okay. So it's definitely more polarized, and I think the only thing that social media has done is it's magnified the level of polarization. Because in the old days, people could get along and basically have a beer and tell me about your kids, what's going on. They knew each other. They happened to be on different teams, and they said, listen, if we're going to get anything done meaningfully, we're going to have to compromise. And you'll get a little bit of what you want, and I'll get a little bit of what I want, but that's how we're going to legislate. Now it's warfare. And they can't even say, tell me about your kids, what's going on with you, what's going on with your wife. You are on the opposite team, we hate you, and we want to kill you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. So it's reached a point, and I don't know how you turn that back.
And that's because...
Well, there was a podcast that really talked about really in the 90s when kind of politics changed, where people had these encampments where I'm in this camp, you're in that camp, and it became personal attacks.
Why do you think it changed?
Because there's a couple different things. I think one was that there was Reagan passed this thing called the Fairness Doctrine, which in the old days there were basically 3 channels. of media, news. And there wasn't cable news, there wasn't talk radio. And the fairness doctrine said, listen, we need more outlets than these 3 channels. And then you had syndicated talk shows. So you had people like Rush Limbaugh that had a syndicated talk show and could go on and ramble about basically anything. And remember, positive news sells less than negative news.
Right.
So that was really the beginning of I'm in one camp, you're in the other camp. And what Rush did is that he made attacking the other camp personally okay.
Okay.
And then you carry that forward, and the Speaker of the House at that point was this guy Newt Gingrich, and the whole campaign was that in order for more Republicans to win, we're going to have personal attacks, and we're going to really draw the line here, and that was really the beginning of the change.
And that wasn't commonplace before.
No.
Interesting.
He had this thing called contract with America. You know, the Republicans are going to have this contract with America. We're right, they're wrong. You know, they're the libs. You know, we're the grand old party.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want small government, lower taxes, and a better economy, you're with us. And these libs just want to spend money. So it was even how they framed it. It wasn't the Democrats and the Republicans. You know, they started to use names, nicknames.
Yeah. So that was the 90s was the origin of that?
Early 90s.
Okay.
And then what followed from there was cable news. You know, so then the Foxes and the CNBCs and the MSNBCs and you have the CNNs of the right and the left, and then what would happen is that in the old days you looked at the news, you read a paper, you watched the news to get informed of hold on, one thought, you got informed of issues. Now what happens, you pick what you want to watch or pick what you want to listen to be affirmed of your belief system. So curiosity, people became less and less and less curious, and they just wanted to be basically fed what their belief system was, and they got deeper and deeper and deeper in their camp.
I agree, people want to be affirmed by whatever news station they listen to. There's obviously, like, you kind of know what side of the aisle each organization falls under, and there's very few truly moderate news sources. But was that not the case with newspapers? Because newspapers...
Yeah, there was always, the New York Times was going to be more liberal. You definitely had that, but you needed to be curious, and you needed to do your own research to get the news.
Okay.
So a good example is that, if I heard something my buddies were talking about, I would come home and tell Mom, hey, the guys are talking about this. And she goes, oh, let me look into it. And she'll go to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, she'll go to a right-leaning paper, a left-leaning paper, a moderate paper.
Was that common, though, for most people to do?
No, but that's why now you don't have to do that. So the current system has eliminated any curiosity. So, because curiosity requires work,
but
you had to think and be curious. Is that right? And do your own reading instead of actually listening to Fox or some news outlet that is going to force feed you something, and you eliminate any type of curiosity.
Right. I know, but I'm just saying you could have. Were there not people that said, I only read this newspaper?
Yes, but cable news and the radio is so easy to just click it.
Yeah.
And you can hear it, and it's over and over again.
You'd almost think that would make it easier to hear more sides.
Yeah, but not with the channel, because you got to switch the channel. So with a
but
newspaper,
you get a whole other newspaper.
Yeah, but I think the problem with the newspaper is that it takes time to read, and people are busy, and they don't always read the paper.
Yeah.
It's easy to be doing the dishes. You can multitask with the TV on.
Yeah.
You can vacuum, you can do the dishes, you can fold the laundry. You can't read a newspaper and do the dishes and the laundry and, change a diaper. You can't.
Yeah. I think that the multitasking is actually an interesting point, because I think it's a big problem with kids, young people, is being overly stimulated all the time. And going into some other discussions we've had about health, when you're really overstimulated, you get put in that sympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system balance. And when you're too much in that side, you're in the fight or flight, and you're wound up, and you're like this, and you're not able to rest well, you're not able to heal, you're not able to recover. And I almost think that could even play a role in people being more wound up. Is everyone is always, that you have something in your ears, you're being bombarded with information constantly. As I think a lot of maybe more young people, I can't speak to people really outside my generation, but are always listening to something, have some sort of media in their ears or in front of their eyes, and it makes it really hard to truly get into that parasympathetic rest and relax state. So I think people are that could play. That's a theory, but I think that could really play a role in people being more wound up and more
Interesting.
Aggressive in their beliefs. But that's your theory on why things are more polarized. It's just easier to flip the switch and get the exact news that you want. You don't have to put in the work of
the camps were certainly less defined, and there was a lot of overlap in issues. The camps are very defined, and I think the view today in politics is that you need to pick a side. You can't be. If I tell someone that, well, I'll tell you what my view is if you tell me what the issue is, and they're like, well, hold on here. You're either on this camp or you're on this camp. You can't be wishy-washy, about this.
And some people do kind of look down on being independent, because, well, in some states you can't vote in the primaries.
And it's a cop-out. What do you mean you're an independent? You either you like the Cowboys or you like the the Giants.
Yeah.
And you can't.
But they think that's like, I shouldn't say they. I've had some responses where it's like, you can't even vote in the primary, so you're not able.
Right.
You can't make an impact.
Right.
So that's like you're hurting our cause. So I think it's interesting, but I think it's a smart choice. Hesitant if I want to talk about that. Well, I'll bring this up and just steer clear of like the actual politics of it.
Yeah.
So, the former President Trump has a clear popularity with a certain demographic. Several demographics, but you hear a lot about him really appealing to the people that are live in the flyover states, and the people that really don't feel heard and acknowledged by our government.
Yep.
You can look at that, like Appalachia, people from those regions, which is where his running mate is from. What do you think that says about the state of our nation? Because irrespective of his politics, his rhetoric is, in my opinion, really problematic with, and I think he's really reckless with his rhetoric. And I understand that he speaks simply, which can appeal to some people, because I think when politicians use really complex language, like for me, I know I can get frustrated because I just don't understand the system, especially a couple years ago when I really didn't understand it, and I was like, I don't even know what they're talking about, like this is frustrating. And then you have someone come along who speaks very directly, very bluntly, very disrespectfully often, but very bluntly, simply, everyone can understand it. And for people that are maybe, I don't want to say everyone that is in his camp is uneducated, because that's not the case.
Right.
But among people that are uneducated, he seems to be very, very popular.
Yep.
And I think that could play a role. But also, going back to how maybe harmful and reckless some of his word selection can be, what do you think it says about the state of our country that someone that speaks like that is so popular?
Well, I think a couple things. One is that one thing that you mentioned earlier about he speaks clearly, so it helps you understand the issue. If he speaks clearly and not truthfully, you might understand the issue, but it might not be accurate understanding of what the issue is, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think the state of the country is that the country is really big and diverse. And one thing I learned biking across the country slowly is that if you're in Texas and you think about the people in this region that you're biking, and you think about how the House of Representatives is set up, where you have, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives, and they're all based on population. So you're going through the swath of Texas or Arizona or in Mexico, and their issues there seem so foreign to you in the state of Connecticut or Vermont, but they're real issues for them. So when the House of Representatives, when their member comes back who represents that group, is talking publicly about issues, you think, what are they talking about? So then it just makes you realize the country is almost too big.
Yeah.
So, and you also, when you look at a map, as most of the population is on the East Coast or the West Coast, and there's this giant part of the middle of the country that really isn't all that populated. And it happens even in a state like Texas. Most of the population in Texas is between, Austin, Dallas, and Houston. And I think you mentioned something about a different state that is like that too.
Oh, well, I was talking about Vermont and how it's the most, it's very sparse, but I was having a different conversation the other day about how, I didn't know this, I was told that Vermont's school systems are like the public schools are like the most sparse in terms of there's a lot of public schools that have very few students. Yeah. Which stresses it's expensive.
Yeah, because you need a superintendent and principals, and everything gets duplicated. So, so I think part of that is that you have the two coasts. You have what's in the middle, and yes, it's been a flyby state for many years, and I think part of it is a little bit complicated. Where you had the whole the decline of the industrial base, Detroit, Cleveland, and that's part of globalization, and all these people basically have been left behind. So every time there's an election cycle, they talk about, well, we're going to retrain you, and nothing really happens. And Trump can come in and say, we're going to bring those jobs back, but in Saginaw, Michigan, they're not going to build 7 plants. It takes years and years and years, and why would they build them there? And then, so the whole idea of what the goods that are being sold about these jobs, it's a complete oversimplification, but it's the first time that a lot of people in the middle of the country have been spoken to.
Right.
And so they're clamoring for, something.
But that speaks to, I think people that are very anti-Trump see the people that support him and think, how could you, they're disgusting, they're this.
Well, this is where Hillary Clinton talked about the deplorables.
Yeah.
Which just completely, was a bullet in her head. But I mean, it's just, and some of these guys are my friends that I grew up with. They're caught in this vortex where they don't want to move. They like their life, but their kids have fewer opportunities than what they had, and they see that it's real.
Well, that's what I'm saying is his popularity, whether you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, is shedding light on a big issue, and how there's this huge portion of people that feel so unheard and unseen, and that's a big problem. And I think it would just be really helpful for people that are not in that camp to think a little bit about, okay, why, given how I think I think very lowly of his character, and I think there's not many people that say he's, irrespective of politics, I don't think there's many people that say he's a great guy. And so, given that people probably have that awareness that he's not a great guy, yet still support him, that points to a big issue.
Yeah.
Because they're saying that things are so bad for that group of people that they're willing to oversee severe character flaws and be in some cases like a diehard fan, like would do anything.
Well, remember, you can have doctors that support him too. So it's not just, uneducated white men.
I'm not saying all. I think that's an important distinction. I tried to say it a little earlier. Not all of his, far from all of his supporters are uneducated. That's not what I'm saying at all. But out of the portion of the country that is uneducated, specifically in those regions in the Midwest and the flyby states and Appalachia, he, cleans up.
Yeah, he appeals.
It's hit. That's
so
what I'm saying.
I think part of it is that this goes back to the tribalism that a lot of the people that support Trump, there would be no way that they could be on the opposite team. So they have to pick a team, and they're not going to be in the middle. They're not going to be an independent, because that's like a throwaway, vote almost. So they're going to pick that team, and part of it is that if he can burn down the house, maybe the rebuilding process is going to be better. But there's so many other damaging things that take place. I would rather burn down the house in a very thoughtful way where we have joint ownership between the two parties to say that our people, the people of this country, are not being equally served, and we need to have a better mousetrap. Let's think about it. Let's be educated about it. Let's be thoughtful about it, and think about how to create it. That's not what's happening. It's very divisive, and they're saying, there's two camps, and there's the right camp and the wrong camp, and I think at the end of the day, what happens is the people that are most attracted to Trump aren't going to get what they're hoping they're going to get. Because they're being sold a false bill of goods, and each party on both sides, all they want to do is they want to try and win.
Yeah.
So they're going to basically say whatever they want to say to win.
Right.
Which is a shame, but
So this is kind of a similar question, just looking at it from a different perspective. So sometimes I'll look on Twitter or now it's X, or in the comments on YouTube of certain, any video that's even remotely politically adjacent, and you just go into the comments and you just see so much bitterness and so much resentment from both sides.
Yeah.
Really.
Remember, they're camps.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to be very very moderate here, because it is from there's a lot of bitterness and resentment from both sides, and name calling and generalizations, which I guess we're kind of doing right now. But I see that as, when people are lashing out, and this isn't a unique thought at all, but when you lash out, or when someone's mean to you, looking at like a really narrow example, it's internal pain presented externally. Mm-hmm. So I have this, and it's a subconscious thing typically. I have this pain, this insecurity, this whatever, and I'm trying to communicate that pain with someone else so that I can feel heard and seen. And the way that happens is a lot of times lashing out, anger, bitterness, resentment, and you just see that it's so widespread. And I'm just thinking, and maybe I want to preface that saying maybe the comments on Twitter /X and the comments on YouTube is not representative of the whole country, because maybe that's a subgroup of people.
Yeah.
But it's what we see. So why do you think so many people are bitter and resentful?
Maybe they're unhappy with how life has turned out, and they're looking for someone to blame instead of just taking personal responsibility. It's much easier to point the finger. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think they've been wronged. and his platform is one of what word am I searching for? It's a platform of one that basically people think they've been wronged. You know.
Yeah, I want to be careful the way that I say this, but I think what you're looking for is well, first of all, he's creating a common enemy.
Yeah.
Which is they,
Yep.
whatever they is, or
Could be the government,
deep
could
state,
be
things like that. And again, I don't want to. I guess you're saying he is encouraging people to victimize themselves.
Yeah, I think it's maybe encouraging is the wrong word, but
He's saying they're victims and he can help them.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
And I think what has happened is that, aside from Trump, is that I read this book called The Lords of Easy Money, which is the role of the Federal Reserve, and in capitalism you should have winners and losers,
Mm-hmm.
and the Federal Reserve, every time there was a crisis, put money into the system, and it elevated the stock market, and it bailed out companies. Whether it's a bank or whoever, and people that had money in the market won,
Mm-hmm.
Benefited, and people that did not have money in the market didn't, and that was one of the reasons that you had the spread of inequities.
Shrinking of the middle class.
Yes, and you had more winners and more losers, and the spread of inequity got larger and larger and larger. But it's all, you hear that in the in campaign stump speeches, that stock market's at all-time high. Well, that's not a representation of the country's economic strength. It's the stock market, because not everyone has money in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So for the guy renting, living paycheck to paycheck with a college education and student loans, if the stock market's at all-time high, that person's trying to pay student loans off. It's he's grinding it out,
Mm-hmm.
not by choice.
Yeah.
That's why I think the elected officials and whoever's in the White House, the executive branch, legislative branch, Supreme Court, they all need to work together to say, guys, we need a better system. But until that happens, you're going to have these conflicts, and these conflicts can actually turn into something much worse.
Yeah. Well, it's tough when there's power and ego and all that stuff, which is
Power and ego,
everyone involved.
And the victimhood is the worst, because the people that are victims, they're going to want to target.
Yeah.
Who caused this?
Mm-hmm.
And and this country's got 450 million guns.
Yeah.
Well,
because a lot of, I think, ambiguity and the unknown, or that's just the way it is, or it just kind of happened, is not an answer people, including me. I don't like that because it's not comfortable. So when you say,
yeah,
it's their fault, they did it, it's because of them, it's kind of a comfortable feeling, and you can rally together behind that, whether it's true or not.
It's just like Trump saying that you lost your job because of the Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happened in World War II, where when Jews were being persecuted, where that's Germany has an issue, and this is
Mm-hmm.
why. Now, I'm not saying that's what Trump is, but
yeah.
it could lead to so many bad things. It's just unhealthy.
All right, I want to shift away from politics. I wanted to talk about this. The podcast is America Getting Meaner? But we've talked about it a little bit.
Okay.
And we should probably wrap this up soon. So, last thing I want to talk about is your general life sentiment so far. So I have a few questions. First one, what were the biggest personal changes you underwent from childhood until now? And how do you hope to change in your next chapter? We talked about chapters.
Well, childhood, I would say maybe a young adult. I think most people that go through life, they and actually David Brooks talks about this, where early on you are always working on your resume, and then later on you're working on your obituary, and they're very different. Where the resume is about all the things I accomplished and how great I was and how successful I was and I was educated, etc. And the obituary is really about what kind of person you were and who did you touch and how were you, what are the good things you did for life and your family and people less fortunate, and that is a very different bio than your resume. So I think it's normal or natural that as I go through at 60, half my life is over. I'm not going to live to 100.
Yeah.
Highly improbable. So let's say that I have, 30 years is 90. Let's say there's 30 years, So how do I take the 30 years and try and touch as many people as I can in a meaningful way, whether I'm talking to this neighbor on the boat here and trying to be helpful and nice and polite, and the things that are easier to do when you're less rushed trying to build your resume. And you just become a little more thoughtful about how you treat someone at a restaurant, how you treat someone at a store, and you're going through that now where maybe the person had a bad day, and if someone's like, you see that they're rushed, I'll get to you right in a minute. It's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'll be here. It's you get to me when you need to get to me. And I think what happens is that you actually feel better about yourself when you operate in that fashion, and that's going to help with your longevity, because being a stressed and high-strung and always angry at somebody or something, whether it's traffic, it can't be healthy.
Yeah.
It's not healthy.
Yeah, well then, because it's like it's a cyclical thing. Someone's mean to someone, they're mean to someone, so someone has to...
Cause and effect,
Or more than someone. It takes people that can take anger and resentment, interpret it as, oh, actually it's nothing to do with me, or maybe sometimes it is, but usually it's nothing to do with me. They maybe just had a tough day, and operating with empathy, and then you can just end it there, and then just go on with your day and be kind of. It's so simple when you say it like that, because obviously it is really hard to do, but that's interesting.
Well, life gets busy. That's the problem,
Did you expect to be where you are now? Say when you're...
Yeah, I think it's more than I expected. More than. I think I'm one of the luckiest people alive. So, yeah. I have my health. I work at it, but, I have my health, and life's not perfect. So if you really look at, the bumps in the road, certain things could be a little bit better, but we're working on that,
Oh, that's a good answer.
Attitude and effort, right?
Controllables.
Yep, the controllables, exactly right.
Do you have any regrets?
I don't think, I always look back to say, well, if I was a better student, maybe I would have went to Michigan or Michigan State, and I would have probably had a different career path, and I probably wouldn't have met Mom, and you guys probably wouldn't be here. So, no. It's regrets, because none of them were fatal errors. So you can't, I would have made some adjustments here and there, but no regrets.
And then, what are you most looking forward to? You mentioned your next chapter, your next 30 plus years. What are you most looking forward to?
Just trying to smell the roses a little bit. Enjoy watching, the trajectory of you guys, and kind of fulfilling responsibilities for elderly parents. And then the chapter books. So the chapter books right now are just smelling the roses a little bit. Certain things are on hold because you have responsibility with elder parents. But trips like this with mom is magical, and the bike trip across the country, I'm going to do another one in the fall. We're going to Europe in October. Just trying to enjoy life a little bit.
And then 2 more questions. What do you wish you, this is a selfish one for me, what do you wish, and I actually already asked this, what do you wish you did more of in your 20s? I think I asked you this yesterday.
So when I moved to Boston, the one negative was that my core group of friends were not
Spread out.
Yeah, we're spread out. So it would have been really fun to be in your 20s where your core group of friends were, which in my case were going to be in the Detroit, Chicago area, because you could have had created a lot of damage, fun. But that's, again, I went out there and basically I was alone. I had friends, but they weren't those lifelong friends.
Right. And then, this is kind of a big one, but I guess we'll end it on this one. And it ties back into politics. What's your general sentiment about the future of our country?
Well, I'm you have to be optimistic. If you have kids, you have to be optimistic.
There's no point in being pessimistic.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that there is a saying that, Winston Churchill said that, Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all of their options. So I think we're going through that, is that these are growing pains. I am worried about, if people lose faith in the system. Here we are in Canada, and when you go to a restaurant or do anything, you never worry about some guy's going to shoot you.
Yeah.
Because they just don't have any guns.
Yeah.
But in the States, you worry about that more than you should. Because it's just, if people think that there's no opportunity, they can do bad things. And you can just be an innocent victim.
Right.
Which is, that being said, I could be on a bike and, I could blow out a tire, or somebody could be on a phone and not paying attention and hit me, and when your time comes, your time comes. But the controllable, I think as a country, we certainly can control that a little more, but we never will, because it's part of the it's part of the Constitution. But I think part of it is that the controllables are that we're fortunate that we have financial resources and we can choose to move to a different country if we want.
Right.
Which is really, not the best,
but generally, a little bit concerned about my generation losing
faith. If I didn't have kids, I would be like, I'm not going to spend much time worrying about this.
Yeah.
It'll work out. I'm not going to be around to see it end anyway. It's like the whole concept is that the world's going to end at some point, but I'm not going to be around to see it.
Yeah.
I don't want it to end when you guys are around.
Yeah.
And when I say it's dramatic, the world's going to end, it's just, I don't mean like it's going to implode on itself. It just means that it's going to be. But, you guys are going to have, you're going to have options too, where, Jake might live in Canada, you might live in Spain.
Yeah.
And my cousin that I'm going to Italy with, she lives in Switzerland. And you know what? You move to a different country.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think if you're unhappy, if you're unhappy and you have the means, if you're unhappy with the system right now and you have the means, I think either you should try and make an impact, whether you're advocating or you're in politics or you're in or like local politics, or you should leave. Again, if you have the means.
Well, you can move. There are a lot of places within.
But I
the
think you
country.
can't stay if you have the means. You can't just stay here and complain.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. And I want to get away from complaining anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because it just, it's a terrible trait.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Either just be agnostic and keep your mouth shut, or do something about it.
Sweet. Do you have anything else you want to chat about?
I love you. I'm proud of you.
No, me too.
So, yeah.
That was 3 hours.
So let's eat. Let's get your brother and let's eat, so you can get home.
Hopefully that'll record it. Yeah, wow, it was 3 hours.